Close your eyes for a moment. Not completely, just enough to soften the world around you. Tonight, there is no central heating, humming in the background. No glass windows sealing out the wind. No steady electric glow keeping the darkness at a polite distance. Tonight, you are stepping off a wooden ship onto a coastline that does not know your name. The year is 1637. The Atlantic is behind you, restless, endless, finished with you for now. Ahead of you stands a wall of trees so dense it looks almost deliberate, as if the land itself is deciding whether to let you in. You have crossed an ocean believing hardship would be temporary. You were wrong. Winter is already waiting. Before we begin, take a slow breath in and let it go gently. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into the past, consider subscribing, but only if this kind of quiet storytelling brings you rest. Now, dim the lights, loosen your shoulders. The ship creaks behind you one last time, and you step forward. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not true silence, the sea still moves. The wind still travels, but a different kind of quiet. A watchful one. The shoreline stretches before you in uneven curves of gray sand and broken stone. Your boots sink slightly, dampness creeping through the worn leather. The Atlantic wind bites immediately, sharper than it felt on deck. Colder, less forgiving. You had imagined arrival differently. In England, departure was loud shouting dock workers, crying relatives, gulls screaming overhead. Arrival, by contrast, feels muted. The forest ahead seems to absorb sound instead of echoing it. Behind you, the ship rocks in the shallow surf. It seems smaller now. Temporary. Already retreating in spirit if not yet in body. You inhale salt, wet wood, kelp, and beneath it all, something earthy, dense, unknown. You are not the first to stand here, though you feel like you are. Others came before you in earlier seasons, built rough structures farther inland. But you arrive late. Too late. Atlantic crossings depend on seasonal winds effect. Captains understand well, but settlers rarely consider. Ships leave when the ocean allows, not when the land is ready. And so, many arrive in autumn, believing they still have time. You believed that, too. The air suggests otherwise. It is mid-October, and already your breath clouds in front of you. The sun sits lower than expected, casting long shadows from trees that seem taller than any you remember. The forest does not look welcoming. It looks patient. You adjust the small bundle over your shoulder. Inside, spare linen, a wool blanket, a wooden cup, a knife, a book you insisted on bringing. It seemed essential months ago. Now it feels impractical. Around you, the others begin moving hauling barrels, unloading tools, speaking in restrained tones. No one says it aloud, but everyone senses the same thing. This place is colder than imagined. A mainstream truth recorded in early colonial accounts is that many settlers underestimated the North American climate. Western Europe, moderated by ocean currents, experiences milder winters than regions at similar latitudes across the Atlantic. You do not know the science. You only know the wind cuts deeper here. By dusk, makeshift tents stand awkwardly along the shore. Not permanent. Dwellings merely. Fabric against inevitability. Fires are lit quickly, flames snapping in dry driftwood. The warmth is welcome, but fragile. Darkness does not fall gradually. It arrives. One moment the sky glows, dull silver. The next, it drops into a heavy blue-black, swallowing all detail. The forest line becomes a single, ominous shadow. You sit near the fire, knees pulled close to your chest. The ground beneath you radiates cold upward, as if it has stored centuries of it just below the surface. This is new. Cold back home, settled from above frost on rooftops, wind off the moors. Here, it climbs from the earth itself, seeping through your soles, creeping into your bones. You pull your wool coat tighter, the fabric feeling thin against the persistent chill. As night deepens, the forest begins speaking. Branches crack in the distance. Leaves rustle in uneven rhythms. Something large moves, somewhere unseen. The sound carries differently. Here Shapar, less muffled. You imagine teeth, claws, eyes reflecting firelight from just beyond the edge of visibility. A lesser-known detail from early settlement diaries describes these first American nights as overwhelmingly loud, not because of chaos, but because settlers were completely unused to a dense wilderness so alive after dark. You understand this immediately. Sleep feels unlikely. Eventually, you retreat to the tent. The canvas flaps in the wind, snapping sharply like a whip. You lie down, fully clothed, blanket wrapped tightly, boots still on. Undressing feels dangerous, like a surrender you can't afford. The ground steals your body heat faster than you expected. You curl instinctively, knees drawn up, arms tucked inward, hands pressed between your thighs to preserve what little warmth you have. Pride dissolves quickly in the face of such profound cold. The fire outside crackles, settles, then crackles again. You drift lightly, not into sleep, but into something close to it. A hovering state where every sound registers with jarring clarity. A gull's distant cry. The wind shifting direction. Someone coughing in a nearby tent. Your body refuses to surrender, standing guard over itself. Sleep here is a negotiation, not a given. You remember your bed back. Home a straw mattress. Inside stone walls thick enough to hold warmth through the night. Even the poorest peasants in England often slept within structures that were centuries old, built with accumulated knowledge of the land and its weather. Here, everything is temporary. Everything is new, even your own confidence. The wind strengthens around midnight. It finds a tiny gap in the canvas, pushing a stream of cold air directly across your face. You wake instantly, heart pounding, disoriented. For a moment, you forget where you are. Then the memory returns in a chilling rush. You are not home. You are at the edge of the known world, and winter has already begun its slow, deliberate introduction. Hours stretch and warp. Without clocks, time becomes elastic. You drift, wake, listen, and drift again. This pattern of segmented rest, a first sleep, then waking, then a second sleep was common before industrial schedules shaped human rhythm. But here, the pattern is intensified. Fear sharpens it. The cold enforces it. You are not resting. You are standing guard over your own body, a sentry against the night. At some point before dawn, sheer exhaustion finally wins. Not comfort, never comfort, but you fall into a deeper sleep for a brief period, dreaming of enclosed spaces, warm rooms, and windows that do not leak wind. You wake to a pale gray light filtering through the canvas. Morning does not feel triumphant. It feels like a reprieve. You sit up slowly. Your joints are stiff. Your fingers numb but functional. Outside, the fire has been reduced to a mound of pale ash. A delicate line of frost rims the edges of the shoreline like fine white stitching on dark fabric. The forest remains unchanged. A silent witness. But you notice something subtle. You survived the night. Not gracefully, not comfortably, but you survived. That realization shifts something small but significant inside you. Winter has not yet shown its full strength. This was merely an introduction, a polite but firm warning. But you now understand the fundamental rule that will govern the coming months. Surviving the day matters, but surviving the night matters more. You stand, brushing sand from your coat. Others emerge from their tents with similar expressions, hollow-eyed, quiet but alert. No one speaks of fear. No one voices their doubt, but everyone glances at the tree line before turning their attention inland. The work must begin immediately. Permanent shelter. Insulation. Firewood, because last night was gentle, and the land has only just begun to test you. Morning light reveals what darkness soft. The shoreline looks less mysterious now, and more exposed. The tents sag slightly in the cold air. Canvas stiff with frost. The sand is marked with restless footprints, evidence of a night not fully surrendered to sleep. You step away from the water and turn inland. The forest stands dense and unmoving, trunks rising like pillars in a cathedral without walls. Pine, oak, Birch. Trees older than any building you have known. Their height feels deliberate, as if the land has been practicing stillness for centuries. If you are to survive the coming winter, you will need walls, real ones. The first trees fall before noon. Axes bite awkwardly at first. The rhythm is unfamiliar. Wood here is denser than expected. Each strike echoes sharply, reverberating through cold air. The scent of fresh sap spreads, sharp, green, almost sweet. You had imagined construction as progress. It feels more like confrontation. A tree groans before it falls. The sound is slow, almost reluctant. When it hits the ground, the earth trembles faintly beneath your boots. Shelter must be fast. Speed matters more than elegance. Historical remains from early colonial settlements show that first-year structures were rarely refined. They were hurried, improvised, built with survivalists. Log frames stacked quickly, mud packed into gaps, roofs slanted but imperfect. You are not building a home. You are building a defense. By mid-afternoon, a rough rectangular frame stands where shoreline met treeline. It leans slightly subtle, but visible if you stare too long. Choose not to stare too long. Logs are stacked horizontally, their bark still rough against your palms. Moss and clay are gathered to wedge into spaces between them. The mixture is cold and heavy in your hands. Mud under fingernails. Splinters in skin. The sun lowers earlier than expected. Already. That realization presses urgency into every movement. You pause briefly and look westward. The light is fading, and you have no roof yet. The sky dims from pale gold to iron gray. Wind picks up as if summoned by your Tao. There is no time for perfection. There is no time for perfection. Branches are lashed across the top beams. Smaller poles laid across them, then armfuls of reeds and bark. The result is uneven, but it cobbles. There is no time for perfection. Mostly, by dusk, smoke rises from a shallow pit dug at the center of the dirt floor. Fire is coaxed alive with dry kindlings salvaged from beneath fallen logs. Flames flicker, uncertain at first, then steady. You step inside the new structure. The air smells of wet clay, green wood, and smoke. It is not impressive, but it stands. Night comes faster than yesterday. As if impatient, you enter fully, ducking slightly under the low door frame. Inside, light from the fire paints the log walls in shifting orange. Gaps between logs glow faintly where embers shine through thin seams of mud. Those seams will matter tonight. You sit near the fire pit and extend your hands toward warmth. The heat feels uneven, strong on your face, weak at your back. Cold lingers in the corners, pooled like water. You realize something important immediately. The ground remains your enemy. Cold rises from it relentlessly. You recall a detail mentioned by one of the earlier settlers who survived the previous year, how sleeping directly on the earth drained warmth rapidly, how raised platforms made noticeable difference. You gather spare planks. Short logs are cut and placed parallel. Boards are laid across them, forming a crude platform barely a foot off the floor. It wobbles when you press down, but it lifts you away from the coldest layer of air, a lesser-known detail found in early colonial writings. Notes that cold air settles lower inside primitive shelters. Sleeping even slightly elevated reduces heat loss significantly. Though settlers did not speak in scientific terms, you feel the truth of it physically. Night settles in fully. Wind tests the new walls immediately. It pushes against logs, seeking weakness. Thin whistles form where mud has not yet sealed completely. You hear them clearly, sharp, invasive. You rise and press extremis into the seam nearest your sleeping platform. The sound dulls slightly. Inside the cabin, firelight trembles with every gust. Outside, the forest answers with creaking branches. You lie down on the platform, fully clothed again. Wool coat still on, boots loosened but not removed. Undressing still feels reckless. The boards beneath you are hard, the blanket thin. But something has changed since last night. You are not beneath open sky. Walls surround you, even imperfect walls. You close your eyes. The wind rattles the roof lightly. Reeds shift against one another. Tiny fragments fall softly to the dirt floor. You open your eyes again immediately. Is it secure? Will it hold? Historians still debate whether early settlers underestimated structural needs or simply lacked time and labor to build stronger homes before winter arrived. From where you lie, listening to the roof strain under wind, the answer feels simple. You built what you could, and now you must trust it. The fire pops sharply. Sparks leap briefly before settling. You roll slightly toward the warmth. That angle matters. Feet closer to the hearth. Face turned away from smoke. You experiment subtly with position until the balance feels tolerable. Sleep does not come easily, but it comes sooner than last night. You wake once when wind shifts direction. Cold touches the back of your neck, where a seam reopened. Without fully rising, you reach behind and stuff cloth into the gap. It works. Small victories begin to accumulate. A mouse scurries somewhere along the wall. You freeze at the sound, heart racing. Then you exhale. Warmth attracts life. Where there is warmth, something will find it. Your breathing slows again. Time stretches. You drift into shallow dreams, indistinct shapes, half-formed thoughts. Not restful yet, but less guarded. At some point in the deepest part of night, the wind dies briefly. The silence that follows feels heavier than noise. You wake into it. The cabin stands. No logs shifted. No roof collapsed. Fire still glowing faintly. You sit up and study the walls in firelight. They look crude, unebon, and temporary. But they held. That realization sinks deeper than warmth. You lie back down, this time without checking every sound. Your body relaxes incrementally, not fully, but enough. Morning arrives through thin cracks of pale gray light. The air inside remains cold, but less biting than open shore had been. Frost clings faintly to interior logs. Delicate patterns, tracing seams. You touch one. Ice forms where breath met wood overnight. You note it silently. Another flaw to fix. But you also notice something else. You slept. Not continuously. Not deeply. But you slept inside something you built. And that changes the quality of fear. You step outside into morning air and look back at the structure. In daylight, its flaws are obvious. Gaps visible. Roof uneven. But it is no longer a hope. It is a barrier. The forest stands just beyond it, unchanged. Winter has not yet shown its full severity. But last night taught you something vital. Survival is incremental. Every flaw revealed by darkness becomes tomorrow's task. Every night survive becomes instruction. You glance at the sky. The air holds a sharper edge today, colder than yesterday. Winter is not approaching. It is unfolding. By the third night, you realize the forest is not background, it is presence. During the day, trees appear solid and manageable. You walk among them, cut them, drag their fallen limbs toward your growing stack of firewood. In sunlight, they are material. At night, they change. Darkness strips away detail and leaves only silhouette. The tree line becomes a single unbroken wall. Depth disappears. Distance dissolves. Everything beyond the edge of firelight feels both close and immeasurably far. You sit just inside your cabin door and listen. The forest does not sleep. Wind threads through branches with layered tones. A high whisper above, a lower groan below. Leaves shudder in uneven waves. Something small darts through underbrush, stopping suddenly, then moving again. Every sound feels intentional. A detail often mentioned in early colonial accounts is how settlers described their first winters as loud, not chaotic, but constantly alive. European forests, long settled and thinned, carried different acoustics. Here, density amplifies everything. The cold sharpens sound. A twig snapping 50 yards away feels like it happened beside your shoulder. The first time you hear a distant howl, your body reacts before your mind does. You freeze. The sound rises thin and stretched, then falls away into stillness. It does not repeat immediately. That makes it worse. Wolves, you assume. Or something close enough. The fire pops behind you. You turn sharply, pulse racing, then exhale at the sight of embers shifting harmlessly. Your body is learning a new language. At first, every sound means threat. But by the third night, something subtle shifts. You begin to categorize. Wind in pine branches has a steady, sweeping rhythm. Animal movement is irregular. Stop, scrape, pause. Fallen bark has a hollow knock. Settling logs inside your cabin make a soft internal crack. You learn these differences by necessity. Sleep demands it. You lie down on your raised platform. Fully clothed again, but not as rigidly as before. Firelight paints moving shadows across the walls. They stretch and shrink with every flicker. At first, shadows looked like figures. Now they look like physics. You close your eyes. The forest continues speaking. A low rustle near the cabin wall pulls you back to waking. Something brushes against wood. A soft sniffing sound follows. You sit up slowly. The fire dims, but still glows enough to cast faint light. The sniffing continues. Curiosity, not aggression. You hold still. A pause. Then retreating steps. You wait long after the sound fades before lying back down. You survived the night before. You will survive this one. A lesser-known observation from early settlement letters notes that many colonists reported vivid imaginations during their first months, mistaking harmless sounds for danger repeatedly. Over time, fear dulled into familiarity. You are beginning that process. The forest has not grown quieter. You have grown more discerning. Somewhere past midnight, snow begins to fall. You do not see it at first. You hear it. A faint, soft tapping against the roof reads. A subtle shift in the air. Muffled. Heavier. Wind loses its edge. Sound dampens gradually. You rise and push the door open slightly. The world is soft. Snow drifts through darkness in slow spirals, illuminated briefly by ember glow. It lands silently, covering footprints, smoothing edges. The forest that felt sharp and watchful now feels hushed. Snow changes acoustics dramatically, a fact recorded in both colonial journals and modern environmental studies. It absorbs sound, reshaping the landscape's voice. You close the door gently. Inside, the cabin feels smaller, safer. Snow presses against walls lightly, insulating them. You lie back down and listen to the new quiet. It is not absence. It is compression. The earlier howl does not return. Instead, there is the faint settling of snow on branches. A distant thud when weight drops from a limb. Your body relaxes slightly more than it has before. The forest is still there, but it is not actively approaching. You drift into deeper sleep than previous nights, not uninterrupted. You wake once when snow slides from the roof edge in a soft cascade, but deeper. Dreams begin to change. Less frantic. Less fragmented. You dream of walking between trees without fear, of recognizing the shapes of trunks in moonlight, of knowing where the ground dips and rises without seeing it. When you wake before dawn, something feels different. You sit up and listen. The silence remains. Snow has transformed the world outside your walls into something gentler, at least for now. You open the door carefully. The landscape has been white stretches in every direction. The shoreline blends into field. Tree trunks rise dark against blanketed ground. Even the forest edge looks less severe. Its harsh lines softened. Your footprints from yesterday are gone. Erased. The realization unsettles you briefly. This land can remove evidence of your presence overnight. You step outside carefully. Snow compresses beneath your boots with a soft, deliberate crunch. The sound is steady, predictable. That predictability feels reassuring. Inside the cabin, frost has formed along interior seams again, but thinner than before. Snow pressed against outer walls reduced wind infiltration. You note this mentally. The forest is not only threat, it is teacher. You spend the morning clearing snow from the roof gently, mindful not to disturb the structure's balance. Each motion feels quieter than similar labor yesterday. By afternoon, clouds thin slightly. Light reflects off snow intensely, almost painfully bright. That brightness lingers after sunset. Night Erevis, but it does not feel as absolute. Moonlight catches snow and reflects upward, illuminating the cabin faintly from outside. Shadows become sharper. The darkness is not black, but silver. You lie down again and notice how snowlight changes sleep. Your eyes open more easily, tricked into believing dawn has arrived when it is not. Your internal clock strains. Time stretches differently now. A detail rarely emphasized in mainstream history is how much moonlit snow affected pre-industrial sleep cycles. With no artificial lighting, environmental brightness shaped perception deeply. You wake several times, thinking morning has come. Each time, the world remains suspended in silver night. Yet the fear you felt 3 nights ago has diminished. You still wake. You still listen, but you no longer imagine every sound as predator. The forest still watches, but you understand now. It watched before you arrived. It watches without intention. The shift is small but profound. You are not being hunted. You are being observed by indifference, and that indifference is easier to rest within than hostility. Before dawn, you settle into your longest continuous sleep yet. The fire burns low but steady. Snow insulates walls. Wind remains distant. Your breathing deepens. When you wake to pale morning light, you feel something new. Not comfort, not safety, but rhythm. The forest has not quieted. You've begun to match its tempo, and as you rise slowly, joints stiff but functional, you realize something essential. The wilderness does not need to love you. It only needs to remain predictable enough for you to learn it. Tonight, it will speak again, and you will listen, but you will also sleep. By the 4th night, you understand something clearly. Without fire, none of this matters. The cabin walls help. Snow helps. Layers of wool help. But fire is the difference between endurance and failure. You begin tending it with a kind of quiet reverence. The pit at the center of your cabin is shallow, lined with stones gathered from the shoreline. Smoke escapes through a crude opening above. Not a true chimney, just a gap in the roof carefully arranged. During the day, fire feels cooperative. At night, it feels unpredictable. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, feeding at carefully chosen pieces of wood. You have learned already that not all logs behave the same. Hardwoods burn slow and steady. They glow deep, red, and last long into the night. Softwoods flare brightly, dramatic, loud, but collapse quickly into ash. You save the densest pieces for darkness, a practical decision. Fire must last until morning. Historical settlement records confirm how central the hearth was to early colonial survival. Cabins were built around it. Sleep was arranged according to its warmth. Entire nights revolved around maintaining its balance. You feel that truth in your bones. The flames lick upward, casting restless light against log walls. Smoke rises and twists toward the opening, but some lingers curling back down briefly before finding its way out. Your eyes sting slightly. You accept Italiano. Better smoke than frostbite. You lie down angled toward the fire, feet closest to the warmth, face turned slightly away from direct heat. This position has become instinctual, but tonight, something shifts. The wind outside changes direction. At first, you do not notice. Then smoke behaves differently. It does not rise cleanly. It hesitates. A subtle cloud thickens inside the cabin. You sit up. Your throat tightens as you inhale. The smoke is not heavy yet, but it is no longer leaving as it should. You move quickly, crouching low where air is clearer. With a stick, you adjust one of the logs slightly, opening space for airflow. You push aside embers gently, encouraging flame rather than smolder. The fire responds, brightening briefly. But smoke still curls downward. Wind outside presses against the roof opening. You stand, heart beating faster now, and climb carefully onto a short crate near the wall. Reaching upward, you adjust the reed, covering near the vent, widening it just enough to change direction. Cold air rushes in sharply. Smoke surges upward in response. The cabin clears slowly. You descend carefully, pulse gradually slowing. This is the other side of warmth. Fire sustains and fire suffocates. A lesser discussed detail in colonial accounts is how often smoke inhalation disrupted sleep during early winters. Chimney design was crude, ventilation imperfect. Many settlers woke choking long before frost ever reached them. You understand how easily that could happen. You settle back onto your platform, alert now in a different way. The fire no longer feels purely comforting. It feels alive, and anything alive requires management. You watch the embers for a long time before closing your eyes. Later, sometime deep in the night, a sharp crack jolts you awake. Not wind, not animal. Wood splitting. A log has fractured under heat. A small shower of sparks jumps outward, one landing near the edge of your wool blanket. You react instantly. You swipe it away before it can take hold. Your heart pounds. You sit upright, scanning the floor carefully. No smoldering threads, no glowing fibers, just the steady pulse of embers. Fire may preserve your life, but it waits for carelessness. Historians still debate whether more early colonial deaths came from exposure or from fire accidents. Records are incomplete. Tragedies underreported. Lying there in the dark, you suspect the line between salvation and catastrophe is narrower than anyone could measure. You adjust your sleeping position slightly farther from the hearth. The warmth diminishes just a little, but the risk feels balanced. You learn another skill tonight: banking. Before sleep deepens fully, you use a wooden tool to draw ash gently over the brightest embers, not extinguishing them, only covering them. This slows their burn, preserves heat, reduces flame height. It is a delicate process. Too much ash, and the fire dies. Too little, and it burns too fiercely and exhausts fuel before dawn. Several colonial diaries reference this practice explicitly. Banking the fire for night. It was not decorative ritual. It was strategy. You feel the strategy in your hands. When done correctly, the fire settles into a low, steady glow. Less dramatic and more enduring. The cabin darkens, lit only by faint red beneath gray ash. You lie back down. Silence deepens. Without tall flames, shadows shrink. The room feels more stable. Less rest. The cold creeps closer to the edges of your blanket, but not aggressively. You woke perhaps 2 hours later. The fire remains alive. That sight steadies you. You lie back down without rising. The rhythm is forming now. Sleep. Wake, briefly, check fire. Sleep again. This is not uninterrupted rest, but it is sustainable. Near dawn, the air grows noticeably colder. The banked embers have dimmed further. You sit up carefully and uncover part of the ash layer. A gentle breath. A few thin twigs placed strategically. The embers respond slowly, then bloom back into small flames. It feels like reviving something fragile but faithful. You sit beside the renewed fire for several minutes, hands extended, watching light reclaim the room. Strange gratitude surfaces, not toward comfort, but toward partnership. Fire demands attention. In return, it offers continuity. You understand now why early homes were oriented around hearths, why furniture faced them, why sleep radiated outward from them in circular patterns. Fire is not accessory. It is access. When morning finally filters through roof seams, you are awake, seated near the hearth. The cabin smells faintly of smoke and ash. Your blanket bears a small singe where the spark landed, barely visible, but present. A reminder. You rise and step outside into brittle morning air. Cold hits your face sharply. Behind you, the cabin interior still glows faintly. You glance back at the thin column of smoke rising into pale sky. It looks fragile. insignificant against the vast forest. But inside those walls, it kept breath steady through the darkest hours. Tonight, you will repeat the process. Select wood carefully, angle bedding precisely. Bank embers with patience, and walk the narrow line again between warmth and ruin. Winter's not simply cold. It is balance, and you are learning it, one cautious flame at a time. You quickly learn that walls and a fire are only part of the equation for surviving the night. What you wear to sleep matters just as much. The first few nights teach you that. Cold doesn't stay outside. It seeps into fabric, settles through seams, and lingers against your skin. Even inside the cabin, with a fire blazing, the temperature drops sharply after midnight. So you start paying closer attention to your clothing. Most of what you brought across the Atlantic is purely practical. Linen shirts, wool stockings, a heavy wool coat, a cap, and some spare undergarments. There's nothing decorative, nothing extra. And when you look at inventories from early colonial settlements, you see the same pattern. Households owned very few garments. Wool and linen dominated everything. Cotton was a rarity, and silk was almost non-existent. Clothing was chosen for one reason: durability and warmth, not comfort. So you begin to layer your clothes deliberately. First, a dry linen shirt closest to your skin. Linen feels cool at first, but it adjusts to your body temperature quickly. It also absorbs moisture, which turns out to be more important than you ever expected. The sweat from a hard day's work can become dangerous at night. Damp fabric just steadily pulls heat away from your body. Over the linen, you wear wool. Yes, wool scratches. It smells faintly of smoke and animal oil, but it traps air incredibly well, and trapped air is insulation. You put on one wool layer, then another if you have it. Sometimes you even turn a garment inside out, just to create more small air pockets between the layers. You stop thinking about how you look. You only think about heat retention. One of the earliest and most vital lessons is simple. Never, ever sleep in damp clothing. It sounds obvious, but when you're exhausted, it's tempting to take shortcuts. After long days of hauling wood or clearing snow, it's so much easier to just lie down as you are. The first time you did that, you woke up shivering so deeply your teeth were chattering, and you couldn't get warm. Now, no matter how tired you are, you change, even if it means standing in the cold air for a few moments. You hang the damp clothes near the hearth, not too close. Sparks are still a risk, but near enough to dry slowly overnight. Your nighttime routine becomes a structured ritual. Dry linen, a wool layer, wool stockings, sometimes doubled up, and a nightcap pulled low over your ears. The nightcap is surprisingly important. Many settlers wore them without even questioning why. Some believed heat escaped through the head more than any other part of the body. Modern science might debate the exact percentages, but in your experience, covering your head noticeably reduces the overall chill. Without it, your scalp aches. With it, your whole body feels more stable. Your feet require special attention. Your toes are always the first to lose warmth. If they grow numb, sleep is impossible. You start testing different methods. 1 pair of wool stockings, 2 pairs, wrapping extra cloth around them, tucking them against your legs. Eventually, you settle into a reliable pattern. Dry wool stockings, feet angled toward the hearth, and your blanket tucked tightly around your ankles to block any drafts. You place your shoes near the fire, not to make them toasty, but to keep them from freezing solid. Frozen leather becomes stiff and cracks, and morning work is a lot harder if your boots are rigid. These small preparations at night truly shape the entire next day. A detail you often see mentioned in letters from this period is that people commonly slept fully clothed in winter. Undressing meant exposing your skin to frigid air, only to have to redress in freezing temperatures at dawn. Modesty had to adjust to necessity. You follow the same practice, loosening your belt, sometimes even using your outer coat as an extra blanket. You also learn what doesn't work. Metal buttons grow painfully cold against your skin. Tight laces restrict your circulation. Anything that presses too firmly leaves sore spots by morning. Sleep out here isn't about softness. It's about tolerance. You find yourself repairing clothing much more frequently now. Seams weaken from constant use. Wool thinth at the elbows. Linen frays. At the cuffs. Even the smallest tears matter. A tiny gap in the fabric becomes a chilling draft against your skin. So some evenings, before lying down, you sit near the fire with a needle and thread. Your fingers are stiff with cold, but you mend the clothes quietly while the embers glow. It feels slow and repetitive, but you understand its deep importance. A warm body works better. That's reason enough. Occasionally, fur enters the picture. Through trade or just good fortune, someone might acquire a small animal skin. The first time you sleep with fur layered beneath you, the difference is immediate. It holds warmth differently than wool. The heat just seems to linger longer. It doesn't eliminate the cold, not at all, but it reduces its sharpness. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how quickly settlers adopted indigenous clothing techniques. Some adapted early on, while others resisted changes tied to an unfamiliar culture. But from your position, on a raised wooden platform in the middle of winter, practicality always outweighs pride. If something works, you use it. Your hands remain a difficult problem. Sleeping in gloves can reduce dexterity and restrict blood flow. Sleeping without them leaves your fingers exposed. After some experimenting, you settle on keeping your hands bare but tucked close to your torso or underneath your thighs for warmth. When you wake up briefly during the night, you no longer panic. You just assess, are my feet warm? Is my neck exposed? Has the blanket shifted? You adjust quietly and go back to sleep. It becomes automatic. Another thing you notice is how differently people dress for sleep. Some layer excessively and wake up sweating, which quickly leads to being chilled. Others underlayer and shiver constantly. But over time, most people settle into a balanced routine, one shaped by their own trial and error. No one lectures you. Experience teaches much faster. You begin to feel heavier at night, wrapped in layers of fabric and wool and habit. Just turning over requires effort. But once you're still, the warmth builds gradually. It starts in your core and slowly moves outward. If you ate a good meal that evening, the warmth holds on longer. If you didn't, the layers only slow down the inevitable chill. Clothing can't replace fire or food, but it supports them both. One night, the wind rises stronger than usual. You can hear it pressing against the cabin walls. The temperature drops even further. You wake up and notice your shoulder is slightly exposed where the blanket shifted. The cold is immediate and sharp. You pull the fabric higher and roll inward. Within minutes, the warmth returns. You lie there, still, aware of how small that vulnerability was, just a few inches of exposed cloth. These nights are teaching you a lesson in precision. Morning arrives with a familiar stiffness. You sit up slowly and begin peeling off the layers in a controlled order. You let the cold air touch your skin gradually, not all at once. Rushing just makes the body protest more strongly. You stand and stretch, your joints slowly adjusting. Your clothing lies around you, simple garments, worn, patched, ordinary. Yet each piece contributed to your survival through the night. There's nothing dramatic about wool and linen, but without them, the night would feel much, much longer. As evening approaches again, you prepare in the exact same way. Dry layers. Check the seams. Arrange your stockings. Pull your cap down low. You no longer think of your clothing as separate from your shelter. It is your shelter. Portable walls stitched together, worn into the darkness. And tonight, like every night now, you will carry those walls with you into sleep. By the second week of steady cold, you begin to notice a pattern. Nights after larger meals feel different. Not warmer exactly, but steadier. The first few evenings after arrival, food was rationed cautiously. Barrels of grain were counted, salted meat distributed carefully. No one wanted to consume too much too quickly. But cold changes calculations. You start paying attention to how your body responds after supper. On evenings when you eat lightly, sleep becomes restless before midnight. You wake colder, earlier. Your stomach tightens. Your limbs lose warmth more quickly. On evenings when you eat a full portion, thick stew, dense bread, a bit of fat, warmth lingers longer beneath your layers. You do not know the word calorie. You only know fuel. Colonial ration records show winter diets were intentionally heavy. Grains, salted pork, dried peas, root vegetables when available. Fat was not indulgence. It was survival. You feel that truth each night. The evening meal becomes structured around the coming dark. Cooking happens earlier than you expect. By late afternoon, shadows already lengthen. Fire for cooking merges naturally into fire for warmth. You sit near the hearth. A stew simmers slowly in a heavy pot. The smell fills the cabin. Meat softened by long-boiling onions. If you have them, dried herbs brought from across the sea. Even before you eat, your body responds. The scent itself feels warming. You eat deliberately now. Not hurried. Bread torn slowly, broth swallowed carefully. You notice how heat spreads outward from your stomach after several minutes. It moves gradually into your chest, then arms. It feels different from fire warmth, Maureen. There is a small but revealing note in some early winter letters describing settlers eating their largest meal toward evening rather than midday during colder months. It was not tradition alone. It was practical. Fuel consumed before sleep, sustained warmth through the coldest hours. You are living that experiment nightly. Fat makes the most noticeable difference. When a spoonful of render lard is added to stew, you feel it hours later. The warmth does not spike quickly like firelight. It holds steady. You begin to value fat differently. Butter, if any remains, is rationed carefully. Salted pork fat is saved and reused. Even the grease left in a cooking pot is scraped and added back to food. Nothing is wasted. You drink something warm before lying down whenever possible. Sometimes broth. Sometimes heated water when supplies run thin. Occasionally, thin cider warmed gently. The effect is modest but real. The warmth in your chest makes the first hour of sleep easier. You notice differences in others as well. Those who eat less wake more often. Those who are reluctant to take full portions out of fear for future shortages shiver more deeply by midnight. Children are given slightly more when possible. Their bodies burn through warmth faster. This redistribution happens quietly. No announcement, just a slightly fuller bowl placed in smaller hands. You begin thinking about food as insulation. Fire warms the air. Clothing traps it. Food sustains it. Without enough food, even the best-built cabin feels colder. There is ongoing debate among historians about how fully settlers understood the connection between diet and nighttime warmth. Some argue it was instinctive. Others suggest trial and error. From your experience, it becomes obvious quickly. The body is a furnace. It needs fuel. One evening, supplies run slightly thinner than expected. The stew is stretched with more water than usual. Bread rations are smaller. You eat your portion slowly, aware it is lighter. That night, you wake earlier than usual. Your feet grow cold faster. You pull your blanket tighter and turn toward the hearth. But the internal warmth you have grown used to is weaker. You lie awake longer before sleep returns. The next day, wood gathering feels heavier. Energy is lower. The connection becomes undeniable. Food affects sleep. Sleep affects work. Work affects food supply. Everything connects. You begin to think ahead each evening. How much wood remains? How much grain? How many weeks until deeper winter? These thoughts drift through your mind as you lie down. Sometimes they follow you into dreams. You dream of full tables, of harvests not yet planted, of ovens radiating steady heat. When Juwaki, hunger returns quickly. Morning appetite is sharper now than it was in the mild days of autumn. Cold increases need. Another subtle change emerges. Gratitude shifts. Early meals felt routine. Now they feel strategic. You chew more consciously. You notice texture, weight, substance. You notice how different foods feel in your stomach. Dense bread sits heavy, good for long burn. Thin porridge warms quickly but fades sooner. Meat provides deeper steadiness. You also observe that overeating slightly before sleep can make breathing uncomfortable when lying flat. You adjust portions carefully, balancing fullness with comfort. Nothing is random anymore. Even meal timing follows rhythm. Eat, let warmth spread. Bank fire. Layer clothing. Lie down. You wake once during the night to check the hearth. The fire burns low but steady. You shift slightly and notice something unusual. You are not cold. Not fully warm, but not uncomfortable. The internal heat from your meal still lingers. You close your eyes again without adjusting blanket. That feels like progress. In the quiet dark, you understand something essential. The coming winter will not be survived by any single solution. Not by walls alone. Not by fire alone. Not by clothing alone. It will be survived by accumulation. Small advantages layered together. Food is one of those layers. Morning comes, and as you rise, you feel hunger already building again. But you also feel strength. Enough strength to work. Enough strength to gather wood, to patch walls, to prepare for another night. As evening returns, you'll approach the cooking pot differently now. Not just as a meal, but as preparation. You stir the stew slowly. Add a small spoon of saved fat. Watch it melt and blend. When you eat, you do so knowing the warmth you build now will carry you into darkness. Sleep, your learning, begins long before you lie down. It begins at the table. At first, everyone tried to sleep separately. There was an unspoken instinct to preserve space, to maintain small boundaries of privacy. Even inside a rough cabin, ebb and winter habits from other places remain for a while. But cold reshapes habits quickly. The first, truly bitter night makes the decision for you. The temperature drops sharply after sunset. Wind strengthens and pushes against the walls in steady waves. Even with layered clothing and a well-fed fire, the air inside the cabin feels thinner. You lie on your platform and feel warmth drain faster than usual. Across the room, someone shifts repeatedly. Another coughs. A child whimpers softly. The fire burns, but it cannot reach every corner. You begin to understand something simple. Heat shared lasts longer. Historical records from early colonial settlements make clear that shared beds were common, not just for families, but for unrelated adults. Beds were expensive to build. Space was limited. But more than that, warmth mattered. You sit up slowly and look around the cabin. Others are already adjusting. One platform is moved slightly closer to another. Blankets are gathered together. Without discussion, sleeping positions begin to shift. You slide from your platform and carry your blanket toward the center of the room. No ceremony, no announcement, just proximity. You lie down beside someone you barely knew weeks ago. At first, the closeness feels unfamiliar, shoulders nearly touching. Breathing audible, movement magnified, but within minutes, something changes. The air under shared blankets warms faster. Heat no longer escapes as easily into open space. Your feet, usually the first to grow cold, remain stable. There is a practical side to this arrangement. Bodies generate steady warmth. That warmth radiates outward. Two bodies beneath layered wool create a small enclosed climate that fire alone cannot replicate. There is also an adjustment period. You learn quickly that sleeping near someone requires stillness. Excess movement disturbs warmth distribution. A restless sleeper cools both. Compatibility becomes practical rather than emotional. One detail occasionally mentioned in letters from the time is that a warm sleeper was considered valuable, not affectionate. Valuable, someone whose body radiated heat consistently improved everyone's night. You understand. The arithmetic. You turn slightly away to give space, but not too much. Elbows tucked, knees bent, blankets pulled tightly around both of you to block drafts. The fire crackles softly. Outside, wind continues its steady pressure. Inside, breathing synchronizes gradually. You notice how your own breath warms the air beneath the blanket. Inhale cool. Exhale warm. The pocket of air around your face becomes milder. You pull the blanket higher, creating a small insulated chamber. At first, you worry about suffocation, but airflow remains sufficient. Moisture builds slightly on fabric, but not dangerously. The balance holds. Children are placed deliberately between adults. Their smaller bodies lose heat faster. They do not protest the arrangement. In fact, they sleep more quickly once surrounded. You notice this clearly. A child who woke repeatedly in previous nights now remains still, breathing deeply. Adults adjust around them. Blankets are redistributed. Someone closer to the fire moves slightly outward so a weaker sleeper can take their place. No one argues. Cold simplifies priorities. Privacy becomes secondary. Survival becomes communal. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether these arrangements strengthened bonds or were simply endured. From your position beneath shared wool, the distinction feels irrelevant. Warmth matters more than comfort. As the night deepens, you wake briefly when someone shifts. Instead of alarm, you feel mild adjustment. Heat redistributes. Breathing settles again. You fall back asleep more easily than on previous solitary nights. The difference is measurable. Longer intervals between waking, less sharp, cold at shoulders, less urgency in checking the fire. You still wake once to bank embers slightly, but you do so calmly, knowing that even if flames dip lower for a short time, shared warmth will buffer the drop. The shelter feels fuller now. Not crowded exactly, but alive. Breathing creates rhythm. A small chorus of quiet human sounds replaces earlier loneliness. You realize that fear was louder when you lay alone. Now, sound becomes reassurance. Someone coughs softly. Someone turns. Someone sighs in sleep. Each noise confirms presence. Presence confirms heat. Heat confirms continuity. One subtle change stands out. You no longer wake at every forest sound. The interior sounds, human sounds, anchor you. They drown out distant cracks and howls. You are less alone with your thoughts. Sleep stretches. Further, in the middle of the night, wind intensifies briefly. The cabin creaks. Snow slides from the roof, in a soft cascade. You feel tension ripple through the group. Slight shifts. Brief steering, but no one sits upright in panic. Shared warmth steadies nerves as much as body. You adjust the blanket once more, tucking it carefully beneath both of you to block drafts near the floor. The technique improves nightly. Edges tucked tightly under shoulders, corners folded beneath hips, openings minimized. It becomes ritual. By dawn, the air cools again as the fire fades. You feel it gradually, but the drop is slower. Shared heat carries you through the final hours. When morning light filters through cracks in the wall, you hesitate before moving. Separating blankets means releasing warmth back into cold air. Eventually, movement begins. Blankets fall open. Cool air rushes in sharply. You sit up slowly, muscles stiff but manageable. Across the cabin, others do the same. There are no grand gestures, no spoken acknowledgement of what changed, but you sense it. The cabin feels more cohesive now, not just structurally, socially. Night has reshaped the group. During daylight hours, differences remain. Personalities, habits, tensions. But at night, those differences compress under wool and shared breath. You step outside briefly into brittle morning air. Cold feels harsher after shared warmth. You glance back at the cabin door. Inside that structure, survival has become collective. Sleep is no longer an individual task. It is shared engineering. Tonight, you will arrange bedding more efficiently. Place platforms closer. Assign positions with quiet understanding. No one will speak of it formally, but everyone knows. The cold is patient. It does not tire. So neither can you. And together, beneath layers of wool and steady breathing, you will meet it again. By now, you understand that survival is not about stubbornness. It is about adjustment. The first weeks were spent trying to recreate what you knew. European shapes, European habits, European solutions. Tall walls, steep roofs, open interiors with high smoke vents. But the deeper winter settles in, the clearer it becomes. This land follows different rules. You begin to notice a difference not in your own cabin, but in others nearby. Indigenous families move through winter with less visible strain. Their shelters look different from yours. Lower to the ground, rounded, more compact. Smoke escapes cleanly in thin streams, instead of drifting heavily back down. At first, you observe from a distance. Then more closely, Early colonial journals often mention surprise at how well native communities handled winter conditions. They tonabariet, sometimes respectful, sometimes confused, but the observation was consistent. Their structures were built for this climate. You begin studying what you can. Their shelters do not aim upward. They aim inward. Lower ceilings trap heat more effectively. Smaller entrances reduce drafts. Walls are layered with natural materials. Bark, woven mats, animal hides arranged carefully to block wind. Your cabin, by contrast, was built quickly and high enough to stand fully upright. Standing height costs warmth. You begin to consider changes. The first adjustment is simple. You reduce interior space. Extra cloth is hung along certain walls, creating a smaller sleeping area within the cabin. It feels confined at first, but heat concentrates more efficiently. The difference is noticeable immediately. The second adjustment involves bedding. You manage to trade for an animal skin. Not large, but enough to line part of your sleeping platform. The first night you place it beneath you, you feel the effect within minutes. Heat does not drain downward as sharply. The skin insulates differently than straw alone. Animal fur traps air close to the body. Even slightly damp fur retains insulating ability better than plant fibers. You did not know this through study. You know it through experience now. There remains debate among historians about how much knowledge exchange occurred during early colonial winters. Some argue pride limited adoption. Others suggest necessity encouraged faster adaptation than records admit. From your position inside a wooden cabin with frost forming along seams, practicality outweighs pride. If something improves sleep, you use it. You also observe how fire is managed differently. Rather than maintaining tall flames for long periods, many indigenous shelters rely on steady, controlled burns. Heat is preserved rather than displayed. You begin reducing unnecessary flare-ups in your own hearth. Lower flames, longer embers, less smoke. It requires patience, but patience pays off after midnight, when warmth remains stable instead of collapsing suddenly. Another noticeable difference is airflow control. Before nightfall, indigenous families inspect every seam and entrance carefully. Nothing is left unattended. Drafts are sealed daily. You adopt this habit. Instead of lying down as soon as darkness falls, you spend extra minutes running your hand along walls, feeling for cold air. Mosis, abed. Cloth, adjusted. Straw repositioned near floor gaps. Preparation reduces nighttime interruption. You also notice sleeping arrangements. Bodies are placed deliberately around central heat sources. Children closest. Elders near stable warmth. Adults forming outer layers. Heat circulates inward and outward. It is intentional. You begin replicating this structure inside your own group. Platforms rearranged. Children moved closer to the center. Stronger adults positioned where drafts are most likely. It is not discussed as copying. It is described as improvement. Clothing practices also influence you. Rather than layering endlessly, indigenous clothing balances breathability and insulation. Overheating during the day leads to sweat. Sweat leads to nighttime chill. You reduce excess daytime layering during heavy work to avoid dampness later. Evening clothing becomes more intentional, dry layers only. Small adjustments accumulate. The cabin feels different by the next week. Still imperfect. Still cold at times, but less reactive. You also notice something else. Their relationship with winter is less combative. There is no visible anger toward the cold, no attempt to dominate it. Instead, movement slows slightly. Energy is conserved. Tasks are structured around daylight naturally. You begin to mirror that rhythm. Rather than pushing through exhaustion, you rest briefly when needed during daylight, so that night vigilance remains steady. There is no sense of conquest, only management. One evening, snow falls heavily again. You watch how nearby shelters respond. Their roofs shed weight efficiently. No frantic clearing required. Your own cabin requires careful brushing to prevent sagging. You learn from observation. Roof angles adjusted slightly with added support beams. Reeds repositioned. Next, snowfall sits more evenly. It becomes clear that survival here depends not only on effort, but on humility. You do not speak about this openly, but you feel it. Winter does not reward stubbornness. It rewards listening. The next time you lie down on your platform, fur beneath, lowered cloth walls around, fire banked carefully, you notice a subtle shift. The cabin holds warmth longer, not dramatically, but measurably. You sleep through a longer stretch without waking to adjust. When you do wake briefly, it is from habit rather than distress. The fire glows low. Breathing around you remains steady. Wind outside continues its work, but the walls feel less porous. Morning frost inside the cabin appears thinner. The difference is not luck. It is adjustment. You step outside and look toward neighboring shelters. Smoke rises steadily from them. No urgency. No visible struggle. You understand something important now. Winter cannot be approached as a single opponent. It must be studied, worked. The land has already solved the problem of surviving itself. You are only beginning to learn how. Tonight, you will repeat what you observed. Seal carefully, layer intelligently. Position bodies strategically. Bank fire patiently. Sleep will still be fragmented. Cold will still press against walls, but you are no longer improvising blindly. You are adapting. And that difference may be the quiet edge that carries you through the months ahead. As winter settles in, the days shorten in a way that feels almost personal. You notice it first in the afternoon. The light begins to fade much earlier than you'd expect, and the shadows stretch long and thin across the snow. Before you know it, what feels like the middle of the day is already dusk, with the sun lowering toward the tree line. There are no clocks here to confirm it, only your own instinct. Almanacs from that time showed that winter daylight in this region could shrink to barely 9 hours. But numbers on a page don't prepare you for the lived reality of it. There is simply more night to endure. Evenings begin sooner. All work has to be compressed into these smaller windows of light. Every task must be completed earlier. Wood needs to be stacked, water drawn, and the fire prepared for the long hours ahead. The darkness doesn't just creep in gradually. It closes in, like a curtain falling. And once it settles, it lingers. But the snow transforms that darkness in subtle, almost magical ways. On clear nights, the moonlight reflects sharply off the ground, illuminating the world in a pale, silvery glow. The cabin walls themselves seem to glow faintly from the outside, and shadows become crisp and defined. The first time this happens, you might wake up thinking dawn has arrived. You sit up, look around. The fire is still a low, glowing ember. The breathing of others around you is still deep and steady. You open the door just a crack, and there it is, the moon, high overhead. It isn't morning. The light has deceived you. This pattern repeats itself frequently. This snow light completely confuses your sense of time. Without artificial lamps, your environment dictates your perception entirely. Bright snow under a full moon can feel almost like twilight. The darkness becomes layered, complex, rather than absolute. Your sleep changes with it. You no longer expect one continuous, uninterrupted stretch of rest. Instead, the night divides itself into parts. You lie down shortly after full darkness settles, and that first sleep comes heavily. The fatigue from the shortened days accumulates quickly, and you drift into a deep rest for several hours. Then you wake up, not startled, not with a jolt, but simply awake. Your mind feels clear, your body alert but not distressed. This waking doesn't feel wrong or like an interruption. In fact, diaries from this period frequently describe what scholars now call first sleep and second sleep. It was a natural, segmented rhythm, common before industrial schedules compressed our rest into a single, solid block. You're living that ancient rhythm now. During these quiet, waking intervals, you might sit up. Sometimes you tend the fire, gently adding a small piece of wood or adjusting the embers to keep the warmth steady. Other times, you simply listen. You hear the wind moving through the trees outside, the soft shifting of snow on the roof, the gentle breathing within the cabin. This is a time for quiet. Occasionally, soft conversation might happen. Two voices speaking softly near the hearth. Not an urgent discussion, but sharing small reflections, a memory, a simple observation about the weather. The tone is always calm. Waking in the middle of the night becomes part of the routine, not an interruption to it. After an hour or so, a gentle drowsiness returns naturally. You lie back down, and the second sleep begins. This sleep is often lighter. Dreams come more frequently, and they feel less structured, more like fragments of thought and image. The snow light influences even your dreams. You can notice a brightness behind your closed eyelids, a faint glow filtering through the tiny cracks in the cabin wall. It keeps your sleep shallow at times, hovering just below the surface of waking. Historians don't have a clear consensus on how these long winter nights affected people's mental health. Some argue the extended darkness could deepen melancholy and a sense of isolation. Others believe that this segmented sleep actually allowed for valuable time for reflection and built resilience. From your perspective, living it, both seem possible. Some nights feel heavy. Time stretches uncomfortably, and your thoughts can wander toward uncertainty. How long will the supplies last? Will illness come? Will the roof hold under the weight of the next heavy snow? But other nights feel strangely steady, the darkness removes all distraction. The world narrows to its absolute essentials. The fire, your own breath, the warmth that keeps you safe. And snow also changes sound in a profound way. It absorbs the noises from the forest, distant cracks of branches, and the movements of unseen animals fade away. Even the sound of the wind softens as the blanket of snow thickens. The world outside grows quiet, muffled, and the silence itself becomes a presence. It's a deep, insulating quiet that turns your focus inward, to the small, warm world of the cabin, and the steady rhythm of the long winter night. The cabin feels more isolated, more enclosed. Sometimes that isolation feels protective. Other times it feels distant from the wider world. You notice children struggle more with this rhythm. They wake confused when moonlight floods the room. You reassure them quietly, explaining it is still night. They settle again, especially when wrapped tightly between adults. Adults adapt more easily. You begin anticipating your middle of the night waking. Instead of resisting it, you prepare for it. A small piece of wood set aside near the hearth, a shawl within reach. You do not rush back to sleep. You allow the pause. This acceptance makes the second sleep smoother. You also notice how fatigue accumulates differently. Even though sleep is segmented, you do not feel as exhausted as you might expect. The body adjusts to shorter cycles. Longer nights provide more total hours available for rest, even if broken. One clear pattern emerges. Stress makes the night longer. On evenings when worry dominates low food stores, structural concerns, your waking period stretches. Thoughts loop. On evenings when preparation feels sufficient, waking remains brief and calm. Sleep quality follows confidence. That connection becomes clear over time. One particularly bright night, snow reflects so intensely that shadows inside the cabin are sharp even without fire. You wake thinking the sun must be rising early. You step outside. The entire landscape glows under full moon. Trees cast long blue shadows across open snow. The silence feels vast. You stand there briefly, breathing cold air. It feels less threatening than earlier weeks. The forest is still immense, but it no longer feels hostile. It simply exists. You return inside and lie back down. Sleep comes again easily. By morning, daylight returns slowly and weakly. Sunlight does not carry much warmth this season. It offers visibility, not comfort, but you rise with less frustration than before. The rhythm of night is no longer confusing, it is expected. You understand now that sleep here will not resemble sleep back home. It bends with darkness. It breaks into pieces. It stretches when needed. Instead of fighting that pattern, you follow it. You no longer measure rest by uninterrupted hours. You measure it by function. Are you strong enough to work? Is your mind steady? Are your hands responsive? If yes, then the night did its job. As evening approaches again, you prepare calmly. Eat layer clothing, seal drafts, knowing you will sleep again. The night is longer here, but it is no longer an adversary at ease. and you are learning how to move within it. The decision is not announced. It happens gradually. The temperature drops further than before. A deeper cold that settles in after sunset and does not lift by morning. Frost forms thick along interior seams. Breath hangs in the air longer. Even with shared beds and steady fire, the cabin loses warmth faster. Someone suggests moving the animals closer. At first, it feels unnecessary. Livestock have been kept nearby in a lean-to against the cabin wall, shielded from wind but not inside. But the lean-to does little against this level of cold. You begin to hear the animals more clearly at night. Hooves shifting, saw flowing, restless movement. Their bodies are warm, consistently warm. Agricultural records from early colonial settlements showed that in harsher winters, animals were often kept inside or directly adjacent to living quarters. It was not sentimental. It was practical. Heat is heat. Eventually, the decision is made. The smallest animals, first, goats, chickens, are brought fully inside. A temporary pen is constructed along one wall. Straw is thickened beneath them. Larger animals remain in the adjoining structure, but closer than before. The first night feels strange. The smell changes immediately. Dampfer. Manure. The air becomes heavier. You wrinkle your nose instinctively. But you do not complain. The cold has made comfort negotiable. As darkness settles, you lie down and notice something subtle. The air feels different. Not warmer in a dramatic sense, but less sharp. Your breath does not focus quickly. Frost forms more slowly on interior walls. Animals produce steady heat through simple existence. Their body temperature radiates outward continuously. You begin to understand how valuable that constant warmth can be. Noise becomes part of the adjustment. A goat shifts, suddenly, hooves, scraping wood. Chickens rustle in straw. Occasionally, a low bleat breaks the quiet. At first, each sound wakes you. You sit upright, heart racing. Then you recognize it. Not predator. Not structural failure. Just movement. Within a few nights, the sounds become background, a steady rhythm of life. Some settlers in personal letters describe sleeping better with animals nearby despite the noise. The reason was simple. Noise meant warmth. Warmth meant safety. You begin to feel the same. You adjust your sleeping position slightly closer to the shared wall between human space and animal pen. The difference is measurable. Your feet remain warm longer. The cold does not pool as aggressively along the floor. Children, placed closer to that wall, sleep more deeply. You notice fewer restless movements. The trade-off is air quality. Moisture increases inside the cabin. The air feels thicker. On some mornings, you wake with a mild headache from confined breathing. Ventilation becomes more important. You widen the roof vent slightly during the night waking interval, allowing some stale air to escape without losing too much heat. Balance, again. Everything in winter is balance. There's ongoing debate among historians about whether keeping livestock inside. Increased illness due to proximity or reduced cold-related deaths enough to justify it. Records are inconsistent. From your experience, the trade-off feels immediate and visible. Cold kills quickly. Illness develops more slowly. You choose warmth. You also notice how animals respond to routine. As the fire dims toward night, they settle. Movement decreases. Breathing becomes steady. Their rhythm begins to align with yours. At one point during the night, a cow in the adjoining structure shifts heavily, pressing against the shared wall. You feel the vibration through wood. Instead of alarm, you feel reassurance, mass heat, presence. You wake once to a sudden loud rustle from the chicken pen. Your heart jumps. For a moment, you imagined intrusion, but it is only a bird adjusting position. You lie back down more quickly than you would have weeks ago. Adaptation continues quietly. Straw is replaced more often to reduce dampness. Waste is removed daily, despite freezing temperatures. Cleanliness becomes part of survival. If the animals are to remain inside, order must remain. You also adjust bedding height slightly to avoid direct exposure to rising moisture from the floor. Platforms are reinforced. Layers beneath are thickened. The cabin grows more complex, part shelter, part stable. One unexpected effect emerges. The emotional tone inside shifts. The presence of animals reduces silence. Complete silence had been unsettling. Now, small movements break it gently. The cabin feels inhabited in a broader sense. You wake during the first sleep and hear steady animal breathing. It blends with human breathing. The combined sound creates a low, constant hum. It steadies you. You realize something quietly important. Isolation had been one of winter's sharper edges. Animals reduce that edge. They are not companions in a sentimental way, but they are life-generating heat, life breathing through darkness. Morning arrives earlier than expected, not by light, but by movement. Animals stir before dawn. Hooves shift, a soft lowing signals restlessness. You wake before the sky brightens fully. In a way, they become part of your timekeeping. You sit up and stretch slowly. The air inside the cabin is warmer than it would have been without them. Not comfortable, but manageable. You step outside briefly into brittle cold. The difference is immediate. Air bites sharply at exposed skin. Inside had been milder. You glance back at the structure. Smoke rises thinly. Inside, animals shift and settle again. You understand now that survival is not about preserving ideal living conditions. It is about making use of what exists. Warmth comes from fire, from food, from bodies, human and animal alike. As evening approaches again, you prepare bedding with animal placement in mind. Children nearest the shared wall, adults forming outer layers, fire banked carefully, vent adjusted slightly to allow fresh air without sacrificing heat. You lie down beneath layered wool, aware of the subtle warmth radiating through wood. The cabin smells of smoke and hay. The air is heavy but stable. Outside, the forest remains indifferent. Inside, life presses back against the cold. You close your eyes. Sleep comes, not because winter has softened, but because you have adapted, adjusted, accepted that warmth may come from unexpected sources. And tonight, as breath, human and animal, fills the small space, you drift into rest carried by shared heat. By now, you no longer fear the obvious. You fear the small, not the heavy snow that piles visibly on the roof, not the loud gust that rattles the door, but the thin, invisible draft that slips through a seam no wider than your finger. Winter does not need an open door. It finds the smallest weakness. The cabin has held for weeks now, but wood shifts as temperatures change. Logs shrink slightly in deeper cold. Mud packed between them hardens, cracks, loosens. Every afternoon before dusk, you inspect the walls. It has become routine. You'll run your hands slowly along the interior seams. You move deliberately, eyes closed sometimes, feeling for thin streams of cold air brushing your skin. If you feel even a faint chill, you mark the spot. Moss is gathered during daylight and kept near the wall. Strips of cloth saved from worn garments are folded and ready. Dried grasses are stored in a small pile near the hearth to remain flexible. Before night falls fully, you seal. Push moss into gaps. Press cloth firmly into narrow seams. Pat mud into place where it has fallen away. It is quiet work. Repetitive, but each sealed crack alters the night. Early colonial remains show that first-year cabins required constant maintenance. There was no such thing as a finished structure in winter. Wood moved. Weather tested. Repairs were continuous. You understand this fully now. The shelter is not a completed object. It is an ongoing project. That night, wind rises earlier than usual. It begins as a steady pressure, then builds into sharper bursts. Snow sweeps against the outer wall with a dry, scraping sound. You lie down after a careful inspection, confident you sealed well. But sometime after first sleep, you wake. There is a faint whistle. Thin. High. Not loud enough to wake everyone, but loud enough to pull you from rest. You sit up slowly. The fire glows low but steady. The whistle continues in short bursts. Wind has found a new seam. You rise quietly, moving toward the sound. Your bare hand touches the wall. Cold, sharper than the surrounding wood. You slide your fingers along the seam until you feel the exact point where air pushes through. A narrow crack. New, though it must have shifted with temperature. You reach for a strip of cloth and press it firmly into the gap. The whistle softens but does not disappear. You add moss behind it, packing it tightly. The sound stops. Immediately, the air in that corner stabilizes. The difference is small, but noticeable. You stand there a moment longer, listening. Nothing. You return to your bedding. Sleep resumes more easily than it would have weeks ago. You no longer interpret every interruption as threat. You interpret it as maintenance. This becomes the pattern. Wind tests. You respond. The next afternoon, you notice something else. Cold pools near the floor more aggressively in one corner. You kneel and feel along the base of the wall. A thin gap where log meets foundation. You gather straw and press it into the seam, reinforcing it with a thin board propped tightly in place. Elevation of bedding helps, but blocking low drafts matters more. You begin thinking of the cabin as layered defense. Outer wall, inner, lining, raised platform, blankets, clothing, food. Each layer supports the next. One evening, wind shifts direction unexpectedly. Instead of striking the main wall, it pushes against the door. The latch rattles slightly. You lie awake listening. Then you rise and reinforce the lower edge of the door with a folded cloth barrier. You wedge a small block of wood at the base to reduce vibration. Silence returns. It becomes clear that winter is not dramatic most of the time. It is persistent. There are no grand storms every night. There are small, steady attempts to enter. You adjust your routine further. Before lying down, you sit quietly for a moment and listen. Not to the forest. To the cabin. Does wood creak unusually? Is smoke rising correctly? Is the roof sagging under snow weight? This listening becomes part of preparation. The shelter begins to feel less like fragile protection and more like a responsive structure. It speaks through small sounds. You answer. One particularly cold night, the temperature drops further than expected. You wake to find frost forming along the interior seam near your head. It is thicker than usual. You touch Italiano. The wood feels almost metallic with cold. You add an extra layer of cloth along that seam immediately. You adjust your sleeping position slightly farther from that wall. You tuck the blanket more tightly around your shoulders. Within minutes, warmth returns. The difference between discomfort and danger is often inches. Precision matters. Some historians have argued that early settlers survived first winters through sheer determination alone. You know better. Determination without adjustment would have failed quickly. What carries you forward is attention. Constant, detailed attention. You notice something else over time? The more thoroughly you prepare before sleep, the fewer times you wake. The fewer times you wake, the steadier your work the next day. Maintenance improves rest. Rest improves maintenance. A quiet cycle. Morning reveals the results of your work. Interior frost patterns are thinner. Cold pockets are reduced. The cabin feels tighter. You step outside into sharp air and examine the exterior walls. Snow presses against them in uneven drifts, adding natural insulation. You pat one wall gently. It feels solid. Not perfect, but solid. You return inside and begin preparing for another night before sunset. Sealing cracks has become almost meditative. There is something reassuring in tangible action. You cannot stop winter, but you can narrow its entry points. As darkness settles again, wind rises predictably. You lie down, knowing it will test your work. You do not dread it. You expect it. When you wake briefly during the night, you listen. No whistle. No sharp draft. The cabin holds. You adjust the fire slightly and return to sleep. Outside, wind continues its steady pressure against walls. Inside, warmth remains contained. Winter will find new weaknesses eventually, Wood will shift again. Mud will crack. But tonight, at least, the seams are sealed, and you rest inside something you have shaped carefully enough to withstand another test. Cold is visible. You can see frost. You can feel wind. You can measure snow. Illness is different. It begins quietly. A cough that lingers longer than it should. A heaviness in the chest after morning chores. A headache that does not fade once the fire is lit. At first, you dismiss it. Everyone coughs in winter. Smoke irritates lungs. Cold air dries the throat. But then the cough deepens. It wakes you. In the night. The first time it happens, it is not yours. You are drifting between first and second sleep when the sound cuts through the cabin. A deep, persistent cough from across the room. It does not stop quickly. It builds. You sit up slowly. The fire glows low but steady. Snow presses softly against the outer wall. Animals breathe quietly nearby. The cough continues. Someone murmurs reassurance. Water is offered. The coughing slows, then returns. Night magnifies sound. In daylight, a cough blends into work and conversation. At night, it echoes. It feels heavier, more final. Colonial records are filled with vague descriptions of winter illness, fevers, chest complaints, ague. The language is imprecise. Causes were not fully understood, but winter sickness was common. Cold weakens. Crowded spaces spread infection. Smoke irritates lungs. All of it combines quietly. You lie back down but remain half awake. You listen for breathing. It becomes instinctive. You count the rhythm of inhale and exhale from those nearest you. If breathing remains steady, you relax slightly. If it changes, you wake. The next day, the coughing person works more slowly. Movements are deliberate. They tire easily. No one speaks openly of fear. But extra care is given. A slightly warmer sleeping position near the fire. A thicker blanket. A fuller portion at supper if possible. These adjustments are subtle but deliberate. Night falls again. You lie down aware of the change in the cabin's atmosphere. Illness shifts the tone. Conversations are quieter. Preparations are more careful. The coughing begins earlier tonight. It interrupts first sleep repeatedly. You wake each time, not startled, attentive. There is no physician to consult, no clear remedy, beyond warmth, rest, and hope. Some settlers keep small herbal mixtures from home. Others rely on heated broth and prayer. Most rely on endurance. You rise once and place an extra folded blanket near the coughing sleeper's shoulders. They nod faintly in acknowledgement. You return to your place. Your own breathing feels more deliberate now. You become aware of your lungs in a way you had not before. Cold air has a way of tightening the chest. You breathe slowly through your nose, warming air before it reaches deeper. It becomes habit. The line between cold discomfort and illness feels thin. You watch for signs in yourself. Is your throat sore beyond smoke irritation? Are your joints aching beyond ordinary fatigue? Does your breath feel shallow when lying flat? These checks become part of nighttime awareness. One evening, you wake feeling something unfamiliar. A heaviness in your chest. Not pain. Exactly, Hustpressur. You lie still and breathe carefully. Inhale. Exhale. It does not worsen. It eases slowly. You sit up briefly near the hearth, warming yourself before lying back down. Fear rises quickly in darkness. But you control it. You know that panic wastes heat. Calm preserves it. Another detail often noted in personal letters from the period is how frequently people checked on one another during the night. Fire tending became an excuse to glance at sleeping forms, to listen for steady breath. You do the same. When you rise to adjust embers, you scan the room. Face is partially illuminated by low firelight, breathing visible in faint mist. You listen. Everyone is breathing. You lie down again. The coughing continues for several nights, sometimes better, sometimes worse. Sleep becomes lighter across the entire cabin, not because of cold, but because of vigilance. You begin noticing how illness changes posture. The sick sleep propped slightly upright when possible. Lying flat makes breathing harder. Blankets are arranged carefully to support that position. You help build a small support of folded cloth and spare planks to keep one sleeper angled. It helps. Breathing sounds less strained. Morning brings cautious relief. If the coughing lessens, the mood lightens slightly. If it deepens, silence increases. Winter has already taught you that nights are fragile. Illness adds another layer to that fragility. One morning, after a particularly long night of coughing, you wake before dawn to complete quiet. You sit upright immediately. Your heart races. Then you hear it. A slow, steady inhale, followed by exhale. Relief spreads gradually through you. The cough has simply paused. You lie back down carefully. It becomes clear that sleep during illness is both necessary and uncertain. The body needs rest to recover, but sleep also removes awareness. You learn to balance both. On nights when coughing worsens, you rotate, watch more intentionally. One person remains closer to the hearth, waking slightly more often. Not fully alert, but present. No one announces this rotation formally. It emerges naturally. Children are moved slightly farther from the sick, if space allows, not in rejection, but in precaution. Blankets are dried more carefully, ventilation adjusted to prevent heavy dampness. Winter forces constant calculation. Cold, warmth, proximity, health. You realize something else. The fear of illness can be as disruptive as illness itself. If anxiety takes hold, sleep becomes shallow for everyone. You consciously regulate your thoughts before lying down. You remind yourself of what you can control. Dry layers, full stomach, stable fire. Cialid drafts, listening for breath. The rest cannot be forced. Over several nights, the cough begins to soften. It lingers, but less violently. Breathing steadies. Color returns slowly to the sick sleeper's face during daylight. Relief does not come dramatically. It comes gradually. The cabin's atmosphere eases. Night waking becomes less tense. You still listen for breath, but not with the same tightness in your chest. Morning after the first truly quieter night feels lighter. Not warm, never warm, but less heavy. You step outside briefly and breathe cold air deeply. Your lungs respond without strain. You are aware of how narrow the margin has been. Winter is not only about freezing. It is about weakening. And surviving requires attention not just to walls and fire, but to bodies. As evening returns again, you prepare as always. Layer clothing, seal seams, eat steadily, bank embers, arrange bedding. But now, you also listen for breath, for coughing, for silence. Sleep remains possible, but it is never careless. It is watched, protected, shed. And tonight, as the cabin settles into darkness once more, breathing remains steady around you. You close your eyes, grateful not for comfort, but for continuity. Winter does not treat everyone the same. You begin to see that clearly as the cold deepens. The strongest adults endure long days of chopping wood and clearing snow with visible fatigue, but steady recovery. Muscles ache, but strength returns after rest. Children and the elderly do not recover the same way. You notice it in the evening first. Children grow quiet more quickly. They curl into themselves instinctively, conserving warmth without being told. Their hands feel colder when you touch them. Their breathing turns shallow when drafts slip through unnoticed seams. Older settlers move more slowly after sunset. Joints stiffen visibly. Fingers take longer to respond. Rising from the floor requires deliberate effort. These differences are not dramatic at first, but they accumulate. Family records from early settlements often show winter deaths clustered among the very young and the very old. Not always from a single event, but from gradual weakening. You do not need records to understand this. You see it nightly. Sleeping arrangements shift quietly in response. Children are placed in the center of bedding clusters, surrounded by adult bodies, not just for comfort, for insulation. Their smaller bodies lose heat faster. You give up edge space without discussion. The warmest place near the hearth goes first, to the weakest sleeper. An older woman who worked steadily through autumn now sleeps closest to the fire, even if smoke irritates her eyes slightly. It is not framed as sacrifice. It is necessity. You begin to notice how adults sleep differently when children are nearby. Lighter, more alert. Any small whimper pulls someone awake. A child shifts position, and two adults adjust blankets simultaneously without speaking. Responsibility spreads across the room. One night, wind strengthens unexpectedly. You wake to feel a cold current along the floor. Before you adjust yourself, you reach toward the child beside you and pull the blanket tighter around them. Only afterward do you secure your own side. It becomes instinct. You observe how children's sleep changes when properly insulated. They settle more deeply. Their breathing evens out. Hands relax rather than remain clenched. When warmth fails, they stir constantly. You measure success by stillness. The elderly face different challenges. Cold settles into joints more aggressively. They wake not from drafts, but from stiffness. Turning in sleep becomes difficult. Lying flat for long periods causes discomfort. You help build small supports from folded cloths and spare straw to ease pressure points. You encourage slightly upright positions when breathing feels tight. These adjustments do not eliminate discomfort, but they reduce strain. There is uncertainty among historians about how much structured care early communities could offer in harsh winters. Resources were limited. Labor demands were high, but you witness nightly effort. Blankets redistributed. Fire at hoisted sleeping positions rearranged. Nothing is perfect, but nothing is ignored. One evening, a child wakes crying softly, not from fear. From cold, you feel their small bodies shivering even beneath wool. You shift closer, pressing your own warmth toward them. Another adult adjusts from the opposite side. Blankets are layered more tightly. Within minutes, the shivering slows. You lie still long after the child settles, watching, listening. Children's breathing can change quickly. Adults monitored without appearing to. You also notice how older settlers rarely complain openly. They shift more often, sit up briefly near the fire during night waking intervals, return to bedding slowly. Pride remains, but winter reduces the power of pride. Practical help is accepted without argument. One night, an elderly man struggles to rise after second sleep. His knees refuse. Immediate response. You rise and offer an arm without words. He accepts. Small gestures become ordinary. These acts begin at night, but their effects carry into day. Morning stiffness is less severe when sleep is better supported. Work continues more smoothly. The group remains more stable. Cold forces choices. When blankets are limited, distribution matters. Children first. Elders next. Able adults endure what remains. You feel the weight of that hierarchy. It is unspoken, but understood. Sleep becomes protective architecture. Bodies arranged deliberately. Heat flowing inward toward those who need it most. On particularly harsh nights, adults take outer positions near draft-prone walls. They wake more often to adjust seals. They absorb the brunt of cold. Children remain undisturbed at the center. You notice how this pattern strengthens group cohesion. Daytime disagreements soften at night. Shared vigilance replaces minor resentments. You witness something subtle. The group becomes quieter after dark. Not from fear, from focus. Everyone understands that night carries higher stakes for the vulnerable. Attention sharpens. When illness threatens earlier in the season, it is children and elders you worry about most. Now that breathing is steadied across the cabin, you remain alert anyway. You wake once during first sleep and listen carefully. Children breathing steadily, elder near the fire turning slowly but comfortably. You lie back down with controlled relief. Morning light filters in pale and weak. Children wake slower than before, not from cold, but from comfort. They stretch gently rather than shiver. That feels like success. The elderly rise carefully but without visible strain. You step outside briefly and inhale cold air. The sky remains iron gray. Winter is far from over, but the cabin holds, the group holds, the weakest to remain upright. As evening approaches again, you prepare with the same priorities. Extra straw beneath smaller bodies. Blankets layered inward. Firewood stacked close for easier tending. You lie down knowing your own sleep may be lighter, but lighter sleep is acceptable. It means someone else sleeps deeper. And in winter, the balance matters more than personal comfort. You close your eyes as wind brushes the outer wall. Inside, warmth collects around the center of the room. Breathing settles into rhythm. The old and the young lie, protected within that circle. You remain near the edge, alert, steady, ready to wake if needed. Sleep here is not evenly distributed. But survival rarely is. And tonight, like the nights before it, you choose vigilance where it is most needed. The storm begins quietly. Snow falls in steady sheets through the afternoon. Thicker than usual, but not alarming. You have seen snow before. You have learned how to brush it from the roof and clear it from the doorway. But by evening, something feels different. The wind does not pause between gusts. It builds. The sky darkens earlier than expected. Clouds press low and heavy, flattening the light. By dusk, visibility shrinks to a short distance beyond the cabin walls. You secure everything before full dark. Extra wood brought inside. Door reinforced. Roof inspected carefully. Animals fed and settled. You lie down expecting noise. You do not expect duration. Sometime after first sleep, the wind shifts from gusting to constant force. It no longer arrives in waves. It presses. The cabin responds with low creaks and subtle shifts. Snow strikes the walls steadily, packing against wood with a dull impact. You wake repeatedly, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer volume of sound. There is no quiet interval. Fire must be maintained more carefully. Tonight, cold intensifies when wind pulls heat outward through even the smallest seam. You rise during the first waking interval and check the roof interior. Fine snow dust filters faintly through a weak joint near the vent. You brush it away and reinforce the seam with additional cloth. Outside, the snow hits sideways now. The door vibrates against its latch. Animals stir restlessly. You lie back down, but sleep remains shallow. The storm does not fade. It continues through second sleep and into what would normally be dawn. But dawn does not arrive. When you open your eyes, expecting gray morning light, the cabin remains dim. You sit up. The fire has burned low. The room feels enclosed more tightly than usual. You move toward the door and push gently. It does not open. Snow has sealed it from the outside. You feel a brief surge of tension. Not panic, but awareness. Storms of this magnitude are recorded in early colonial accounts. Multi-day blizzards that immobilized entire settlements. Snow accumulation could block doors, collapse weaker roofs, isolate families completely. You brace your shoulder and push harder. The door shifts slightly. Snow packed against it gives way slowly. You open it just enough to create a narrow gap. Outside, the world is white and nearly featureless. Snowdrifts rise almost to the height of the doorway. Wind still drives fine particles horizontally. Visibility extends only a few yards. The storm has erased boundaries. You close the door quickly to preserve warmth. The cabin feels smaller now. Confinement becomes immediate reality. Work outdoors is impossible. Wood supply inside becomes critical. Ju, asis, stacked near the hearth, is enough for perhaps 2 days, if burned carefully. Rationing begins silently. Flames kept low, embers preserved as long as possible. Time stretches differently during storms. Without clear daylight cues, hours blur. You rely on routine rather than sunlight. Morning meal prepared even though it feels like night. Animals fed in dim light. Snow brushed from interior seams where it accumulates. You lie down briefly during what would normally be midday, conserving energy. The storm continues without pause. The sound becomes constant, wind pressing, snow striking roof beams straining under weight. At one point, a loud crack echoes above. You freeze. Then listen carefully. Roof beams groan but hold. You rise and use a long pole kept near the door to push upward against the roof from inside, dislodging some accumulation. Snow slides off one side in a heavy rush. The cabin shudders but stabilizes. You return to the hearth. The psychological effect of constant noise becomes noticeable. Normally, night carries intervals of quiet. Now there is no silence. Sleep fragments further. You wake not from cold, but from sound pressure. Children sense tension. They stay closer to adults. Elders sit upright more frequently. Conversations remain minimal. Energy is preserved. One detail recorded in several early settlements is how storms distorted perception of time. Without visible sun or clear horizon, days blurred into one extended gray interval. You feel that distortion clearly. You eat when habit dictates. You sleep when exhaustion demands, but there is no visual confirmation of day or night. On what you assume is the second day of the storm, the air inside the cabin feels heavier. Ventilation must be managed carefully to avoid smoke buildup while not allowing snow to enter. You adjust the vent repeatedly, opening slightly when wind direction allows, closing when it drives snow inward. The balance becomes delicate. Outside labor remains impossible. You clear snow from the interior doorway repeatedly as drift accumulates even through small gaps. Physical activity inside remains limited. Muscles stiffen more quickly without regular outdoor work. You stretch periodically near the hearth to maintain circulation. Sleep becomes less restorative during confinement. The body prefers movement. The mind prefers variation. Instead, there is repetition. Fire, snow, wind, breath. You notice irritability rise slightly among the group. Not spoken loudly, but visible in shorter movements, tighter expressions. Confinement compresses personalities. Night arribes, though it is difficult to distinguish from day, and you prepare for sleep as usual. Layer clothing. Bank fire carefully. Arrange bedding inward. Wind continues its relentless push. The cabin trembles at intervals, but remains intact. You lie down, aware that you are not facing a single night. You're inside an event. Somewhere during second sleep, the wind weakens slightly. You do not trust it at first. You remain still, listening. The pressure lessens. Snow striking the walls slows. The constant roar fades into intermittent gusts. You drift into deeper sleep than you have in days. When you wake again and push open the door cautiously, the world is transformed. Snowdrifts stand taller than before. Trees bow under heavy accumulation. The sky clears gradually, revealing pale winter sunlight, reflecting intensely off fresh snow. Silence returns. True silence. After days of constant wind, the stillness feels immense. You step outside carefully, boots sinking deep into drift. The cabin stands. Roof intact, walls steady. Smoke rises thinly from the vent. You turn slowly, surveying the altered landscape. Paths erased, land reshaped, but you remain. Inside the cabin, bedding is rearranged. Fire rekindled slightly stronger now. That wood can be gathered again once drifts are managed. There is no celebration, only measured relief. The storm did not break the shelter. It did not take anyone. You have learned something important. Winter is not always steady pressure. Sometimes it arrives in concentrated force. You cannot stop it. You can only endure it. As evening approaches again under clear sky, you prepare for another night. This time without wind roaring at the walls. The cabin feels steadier than before. Stronger, perhaps. You lie down, aware that storms may return, but also aware that this one has passed, and the shelter held. After the storm, the nights feel quieter, not warmer, not shorter, but steadier. With the immediate threat past, attention shifts inward again to routine, to endurance, to the long stretch still ahead. It is during these quieter nights that you begin to notice how often belief enters the room. Not loudly, not formally, just consistently. Before lying down, someone speaks a short prayer. Sometimes it is structured, drawn from memory. Other times, it is simple. A few sentences spoken softly, asking for protection, for strength, for mourning. It has been happening since the beginning, but now you pay closer attention. Colonial households commonly ended the day with prayer. Sermons and family writings from the period describe evening devotion as a regular practice, especially during winter months when darkness extended. For some, it was conviction. For others, habit. In the cabin, it feels like structure, a marker between day and night. When the final embers are adjusted and bedding arranged, voice is lower. You sit quietly as words move across the room. There is no elaborate ceremony. No kneeling if the floor is too cold. Just stillness. Breathing slows. Speech steadies. You notice something practical about it. The act of pausing regulates the room. After long hours of managing fire, sealing drafts, feeding animals, and listening for illness, the mind remains active. Prayer creates a boundary. Work ends. Night begins. The shift matters. You find that sleep comes slightly easier after those moments of collective quiet. Not because winter softens, but because the mind releases its constant scanning. One detail found in several personal journals from the period is how winter prayers changed tone. Gratitude for harvest or prosperity faded into simpler requests. Endurance, safety, continued breath. You recognize that narrowing. You do not ask for abundance. You ask for steadiness. On nights when anxiety rises, when wind sounds stronger than usual, or when food stores feel lower, the prayers lengthen slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to fill silence more deliberately. You notice how children respond. They settle faster after familiar words are spoken. Even if they do not fully understand meaning, they recognize pattern. Pattern reduces fear. Adults, too, seem to breathe more evenly afterward. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether faith in harsh conditions provided measurable psychological benefit or merely emotional comfort. From inside the cabin, the distinction feels unnecessary. Comfort is benefit, ritual is stability. You begin participating more actively. At first, you listen. Then you contribute a short line. Your voice sounds different in the enclosed space, quieter than daytime speech. More deliberate. You find that speaking aloud in darkness reduces the weight of unspoken thoughts. Worry, when held internally, grows larger. When spoken gently, even in prayer, it loses sharpness. One evening, as snow reflects moonlight faintly through cracks in the wall, someone recounts a story from scripture about endurance through wilderness. The story is not delivered as lesson, just reminder. Authors listen, no debate follows. Only silence. Then sleep. It becomes clear that faith in T-space functions less as doctrine and more as rhythm. It fills gaps where control ends. You cannot command wind. You cannot eliminate illness entirely. You cannot guarantee food supply beyond what is stored. But you can speak. You can mark the end of each day with intention. That act steadies you. There are nights when belief feels thinner, when fatigue outweighs conviction. On those nights, the words are shorter, but they are still spoken. Habit carries what certainty cannot. You wake once during first sleep and find your thoughts wandering toward worst possibilities. Roof collapse, fever returning, supply barrels emptying too quickly. The mind drifts aisily toward extremes in darkness. You repeat a simple phrase quietly, not elaborate, whose familiar the repetition regulates your breathing. Gradually, your chest loosens. Sleep returns. It becomes another tool, like sealing cracks, like banking fire. Faith does not warm the air, but it warms the mind enough to rest within the air as it is. Morning arrives pale and cold as always. You rise and step outside briefly. The sky remains gray. Winter has not ended, but something inside feels steadier. That steadiness carries into evening again. The routine repeats. Food, fire, sealing seams, bedding arrangement. Animals settled, then quiet words. You notice that even those who speak least during the day speak during this moment. not long speeches. Hust presence, a small contribution. The shared act reinforces group cohesion. It is difficult to resent someone you prayed beside hours earlier. Night, conflict softens. Another small effect becomes visible when faith is spoken consistently. The middle of the night waking interval shortens. Your mind does not race as quickly. It moves through checks calmly. Fire stable. Breathing steady. No unusual wind. You'll lie back down without extended rumination. Whether this is spiritual or psychological hardly matters. It works. As late winter stretches onward, prayer becomes less about fear and more about endurance. Less about asking winter to end. More about asking for continued strength within it. You find comfort in that shift. Winter is not an enemy to defeat tonight. It is a condition to outlast. When you lie down after final embers are banked, you feel anchored. Not because the world outside is safe, but because the room inside is ordered. You close your eyes and listen to breathing around you. Words spoken earlier linger faintly. Not loud, not urgent, just present. Sleep follows, more easily now. Not deep, but sufficient. Morning will come again, and when it does, you will rise and repeat the rhythm. Work, warmth, watchfulness, words, rest. Faith has not shortened winter, but it has made the long nights bearable. And sometimes, that is enough. Winter has settled into routine. Not mild, not forgiving, but predictable. You wake, work, seal, tend, fire, eat, sleep. The rhythm repeats without dramatic interruption. And it is within that repetition that something changes. You begin to dream differently. Early in the season, dreams were shaped by cold. You dreamed of open doors, unfinished walls, wind pushing through fabric. You woke with tension already in your chest. Now, the dreams shift. You find yourself dreaming of light, not bright summer light, just longer light. You dream of standing outside the cabin without your breath fogging immediately, of snow thinning near the tree line, of soil visible in small patches where sun reaches first. There is no guarantee these things will arrive soon, but your mind begins rehearsing them. Letters from settlers occasionally mention vivid dreams during winter, dreams of planting, harvesting, warmth. Historians debate whether these dreams were expressions of hope or simple memory replay. From your position beneath layered wool, it feels like preparation. The body survives winter physically. The mind survives it through projection. You wake after one such dream with a strange feeling, not warmth, but anticipation. You sit up and listen. The cabin remains the same. Fire low, breathing steady, snow pressing faintly against walls. Yet something feels slightly altered. Later that day, while gathering wood, you notice a small change in sound. Snow under your boots compresses differently, less brittle, slightly softer at the surface. You pause and press your heel down deliberately. The top layer gives more easily. The temperature is still cold, but not as sharp as the previous week. You do not speak about it immediately. Winter often offers false signals. Brief thaws followed by deeper freezes. Still, the possibility registers. At night, sleep comes with less tension. You still wake during the segmented interval. You still check fire and breathing, but your body feels less rigid when lying down. Muscles unclench more quickly. You dream again. This time of water, not ocean waves, but melting snow running slowly along the cabin's edge. The next morning, you step outside and notice icicles along the roofline. They have grown longer and drip faintly in afternoon light. Dripping means thawing. Thawing means change. The change is slow. Days remain cold, but sunlight lingers slightly longer in the sky. You begin noticing the difference in evening preparation. Fire is still necessary, but it requires slightly less wood to maintain stable warmth through first sleep. Animals stir more restlessly during daylight, sensing the shift before you do. Chickens move more actively near the door. A goat paws at straw impatiently. Nature adjusts, before humans acknowledge it. One afternoon, you see something small near the edge of a drift, a darker patch where snow has thinned. It reveals nothing dramatic. Just a hint of ground, but it holds significance. Winter is not permanent. You lie down that night thinking about soil, about the barrels of seeds stored carefully away from moisture, about fields not yet cleared. Sleep feels different when there is something ahead to prepare for. Not immediate survival. Future labor. You begin discussing small plans quietly during night-waking intervals. When snow recedes, where will the first plot be cleared? Which tools need repair before planting? How many hands will be strong enough for spring work? These conversations are not loud, but they carry forward motion. The mind shifts from endurance to anticipation. Even illness, once a constant worry, feels less present as breathing across the cabin remains steady. Food stores are thinner now than earlier in winter, but calculation changes. You begin measuring not just remaining days of cold, but days until thaw. The distinction matters. Sleep responds accordingly. The second sleep grows slightly longer. Dreams carry more detail. You see yourself walking beyond the cabin without heavy wool layers. You see smoke rising gently in warmer air. You hear birds returning, faintly, but distinctly. One evening, during prayer, someone gives thanks not just for surviving the day, but for signs of approaching change. It is subtle, but noticeable. The tone shifts from endurance alone to expectation. You wake one night to an unfamiliar sound, dripping slow, intermittent. You sit up and listen carefully. It is not a leak. It is melting snow from the roof edge. The temperature must have risen slightly even after dark. You lie back down with cautious relief. This does not mean winter has ended. It means winter is moving. The psychological weight eases incrementally. You notice fewer restless movements in the cabin, less tightening at sudden wind gusts. The group carries itself differently during daylight. Movements remain deliberate, but not heavy. There is purpose now beyond simply reaching morning. Spring preparation becomes topic of conversation. You inventory tools during late afternoon, sharpen blades, repair handles, count remaining seeds. These actions influence sleep. Instead of replaying the same defensive routines, your mind rehearses new tasks. Planting, clearing, building more permanent structures. You understand something important. Winter reshaped you, but it did not define the entire year. As you lie down beneath layered wool again, you feel tired but not worn thin. The cold remains. Snow still covers most of the ground, but your breathing feels easier. Your chest less tight. The cabin, once a fragile defense, now feels like foundation. You close your eyes and dream again of water moving freely, of earth exposed, of fire used for cooking rather than survival alone. Morning will not arrive warm, not yet. But it will arrive, and when it does, you will rise not just to endure, but to begin again. I remember the day the cold returned. It wasn't a gentle slide back into winter, but a sudden, sharp slap in the face. Just days before, the air had been thick with the promise of spring. The snow was melting, the ground was softening, and the first brave birds had started to sing their territorial anthems at dawn. I'd even started planning my spring garden, sketching out where the tomatoes and herbs would go, feeling that familiar rush of excitement for the new season. But winter, it seemed, wasn't quite done with us. It came in overnight, a silent thief. I woke up not to birdsong, but to an unnerving quiet, the kind of quiet that only deep, fresh snow can bring. I looked out the window of my little cabin, and the world I'd seen just yesterday was gone, replaced by a blanket of pristine, unforgiving white. The thermometer on the porch read a number I hadn't seen in months, a number that made my bones ache just by looking at it. The wind had picked up to a low, guttural howl that seemed to be testing every crack and seal in my small wooden fortress. My first thought was the firewood. I'd let my guard down, assuming the worst was over. The neatly stacked cords by the door had dwindled, and what was left was now buried under a fresh foot of snow. My second thought was the water pipes. A hard freeze like this, coming so suddenly after a thaw, is the perfect recipe for disaster. A burst pipe out here isn't just an inconvenience, it's a serious problem. So, the day began, not with a slow cup of coffee, but with a frantic burst of activity. First, the wood stove. I cleared the ash from the night before and carefully built a new fire, coaxing the small flames to life, feeding them kindling until they grew strong enough to take on the larger logs. The crackle and pop of the fire was the first reassuring sound in a world that had gone silent and hostile. It was the cabin's heartbeat, and my own. Then, I bundled up. Layers are everything out here. Thermal base layer, fleece, mid-layer, and a heavy-duty, insulated shell. Double socks, insulated boots, a warm hat, and gloves. Stepping outside was like stepping onto another planet. The air was so cold it felt solid, and each breath was a sharp, crystalline sting in my lungs. The wind whipped snow into my face, tiny needles of ice that found every exposed bit of skin. My first task was to dig out a path to the woodpile. The snow was light and powdery, which was a small blessing, but the sheer volume of it was daunting. Every shovelful felt heavy, and the cold air made my muscles protest. But there's a rhythm you find in this kind of work. The steady scrape of the shovel, the arc of snow flying through the air, the rhythmic puff of your own breath creating clouds in front of your face. It becomes a kind of meditation. You focus on the task, on the movement, and you block out the biting cold. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the woodpile. The logs were caked in snow and ice. I had to knock each one against the other to clear them before I could load up the sled. I hauled it back to the porch, my back and shoulders burning, but my mind at ease. I had fuel, I had warmth. The cabin could fight back against the cold. Next, the pipes. I crawled under the cabin, into the tight, dark space where the plumbing runs. The ground was frozen solid, and the air was even colder than it was outside. I checked every inch of pipe I could reach, feeling for the telltale bulge of freezing water. Thankfully, the insulation I'd wrapped them in last fall seemed to be holding. As an extra precaution, I left the taps inside dripping just a tiny bit, a constant trickle of moving water to hopefully prevent a freeze. With the immediate threats handled, a different kind of challenge set in. The psychological one. Being snowed in can be cozy and romantic for a day or two, but when the days stretch on, and the world outside remains a frozen, monochrome landscape, the cabin walls can start to feel like they're reclosing in. The relentless howl of the wind becomes a constant, unnerving companion. You start to notice things you normally wouldn't. The way the frost patterns creep across the wind, intricate and beautiful, but also a stark reminder of the bitter cold just inches away. You hear the house settle and groan under the weight of the snow and the force of the wind. Every creak and pup makes you jump, wondering if it's a branch about to snap or something worse. To fight off the cabin fever, you have to create a routine. You have to give the day structure. My mornings were for chores, stoking the fire, shoveling paths, checking on the pipes. The afternoons were for projects. I mended clothes, sharpened my tools, and finally got around to reading that stack of books that had been gathering dust. The simple, tactile tasks were a balm for the mind. Sanding a piece of wood, kneading dough for bread, the repetitive motion of stitching. These things ground you in the present moment. Cooking becomes a central part of the day, not just for sustenance, but for warmth and morale. The oven running for a few hours fills the cabin with a delicious, comforting heat. I made big pots of stew that would simmer for hours on the wood stove, filling the air with the smell of herbs and spices. I baked bread, the yeast, a living thing that promised warmth and nourishment. These simple acts of creation feel like defiance. The world outside might be frozen and dormant, but in here, there is life, there is warmth, there is the smell of baking bread. Evenings were for reflection. With the fire crackling and a cup of hot tea in my hands, I'd just sit and watch the flames dance. There's something ancient and hypnotic about a fire. It connects you to generations of ancestors who also huddled around a fire for warmth and safety. You think about resilience, the resilience of the trees outside, their branches bending but not breaking under the weight of the snow. The resilience of the animals, burrowed deep in their dens, waiting out the storm. And you realize you're a part of that too. There are moments of incredible beauty in a deep freeze like this. One night, the wind finally died down, and the clouds cleared. I stepped outside onto the porch, and the world was bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon on fresh snow. The silence was absolute, profound. The sky was so clear, the stars looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. It was a cold, indifferent beauty, but breathtaking nonetheless. In that moment, you don't feel small or insignificant. You feel a deep sense of connection to it all, a quiet participant in this grand, cyclical drama of the seasons. And then, one morning, you wake up and something is different. The quality of the light has changed. It's brighter, softer. You go to the window and you see it. A single drop of water clinging to an icicle on the edge of the roof. It quivers for a moment, catches the sunlight, and falls. Drip. And then another. Drip. Drip. It's the most beautiful sound in the world. It's the sound of the thaw, the sound of surrender. Winter is finally letting go. Over the next few days, the process accelerates. The drips become a steady trickle. The snowpack on the roof begins to slide off in great, heavy sheets. The birds return, their songs sounding even sweeter and more triumphant than before. The world starts to come alive again. Surviving a late winter storm like that teaches you things. It teaches you about preparedness, about the importance of respecting the power of nature. But more than that, it teaches you about your own strength, your own capacity for endurance. It reminds you that even after the longest, coldest, darkest winter, the thaw is inevitable. Spring always returns. It might be delayed, it might have to fight for its place, but it always comes. And that certainty, that promise of renewal, is what gets you through the cold. After the cold snap, you expect another setback, another storm, another sharp drop. Winter has taught you not to trust early signs. But this time the change does not reverse. It progresses slowly, almost quietly. You notice it first in the mornings. Light arrives earlier. Not dramatically, but enough that you wake before the fire has completely faded. The cabin interior holds faint gray without needing the hearth to define shape. You lie still for a moment, watching that light strengthen. It feels different during the day. The sun climbs slightly higher in the sky. It remains pale and distant, but its arc is longer. Snow still covers the ground, but its surface softens by midday. When you walk across it, your boots sink slightly instead of striking a hard crust. These are small changes, but they accumulate. Inside the cabin, frost along the walls forms thinner patterns. Breath does not hang in the air as long. You still layer clothing at night. You still bank the fire, but you begin using slightly less wood to maintain steady warmth. The difference is measurable. Your Mittelofenei waking interval shortens. The fire holds more easily until dawn. You wake once to check embers and find them glowing steadily without urgent attention. You lie back down without adding wood. Sleep resumes quickly. That feels new. Children stir less during the night. They no longer curl as tightly into themselves. Elders rise more easily. At dawn, joints remain stiff, but less painfully so. Animals shift more frequently near the door during daylight. They sense change more quickly than you. One afternoon, you hear something unfamiliar. Water. Not the faint drip from icicles, but a small, steady trickle near the edge of the cabin. Snow along the foundation has begun to melt slightly, forming narrow channels. The ground beneath remains frozen, but surface thaw has begun. You crouch and watch the water move. It is slow, thin, but undeniable. There is caution in your reaction. Winter has offered false hope before, but this time the cold does not reclaim full control overnight. That evening, you prepare for sleep as usual. Layers arranged, fire banked, drafts checked. But when you lie down, the air feels less heavy, less tight in your lungs. You drift into first sleep more quickly than in previous weeks. When you wake during the natural interval, you do not feel tension. You sit up, check the fire. It glows steadily. You listen for coughing, teresnone. You listen for wind. Only a faint breeze. You lie back down and sleep again. And this time, You sleep longer than expected. When you wake pale, sunlight already filters into the cabin. You have slept through most of the second interval. It surprises you. You sit up slowly, testing your body. No sharp chill at your feet, no urgent need to adjust the blanket. The cabin feels stable. Warm enough. You step outside. The air is still cold, but it does not sting as it did weeks ago. The sky holds more color, faint blue, rather than iron gray. Snow along the southern edge of the clearing has thinned further. Small patches of darker earth show through. You stand quietly, observing. This is not spring, not yet. But winter is no longer absolute. You notice that daytime work feels different too. Wood gathering becomes easier as snow softens underfoot. Movements require less force. Your body responds with renewed energy. Even conversation grows slightly more frequent during daylight. Plans for planting are discussed more concretely. Which area will be cleared first? How many days of labor before the ground is workable? These discussions influence sleep. Instead of rehearsing defensive routines, your mind begins organizing future tasks. You inventory tools during the evening waking interval instead of worrying about structural failure. You count remaining food stores, not in terms of survival through cold, but until harvest. The shift is subtle, but powerful. Faith, spoken each evening, now carries a different tone. Gratitude appears more frequently, not for abundance, but for signs. You feel it in your own breathing at night. It is slower, less guarded. You still wake occasionally, but the waking feels optional rather than necessary. You begin trusting the cabin fully. It has endured storm, freeze, confinement. It will endure these last weeks. One night, you wake briefly and realize something unusual. You are warm, not overheated, but comfortable. You adjust nothing. You lie still and let sleep return naturally. In the morning, sunlight reflects off snow with greater intensity. You shield your eyes briefly. It feels almost bright. You understand that winter has not ended suddenly. It is withdrawing gradually. The forest remains bare, the ground still frozen in deeper layers. But light has returned, and with light, your sleep changes. It grows deeper, less fragmented, more restorative. You begin to feel strength returning in ways beyond survival. Strength for building, for planting, for expansion. That evening, when you lie down, you feel less like you are enduring the night, more like you are resting within it. Winter remains present, but it no longer dominates every thought. The subtle shift has begun, and your body and your sleep have recognized it. The thaw does not arrive with a single dramatic day. It advances in layers. At first, it is only sound, water dripping more steadily from the roofline, snow sliding in heavier sheets during the afternoon, the soft collapse of drifts along the cabin walls. You wake one morning to a different kind of quiet, not the brittle stillness of deep freeze, but a muted, dampened silence. You step outside and feel it immediately. The air is softer, still cold, but no longer cutting. When you walk across the clearing, your boots sink deeper than before. Snow gives way to slush in places. Beneath the thinning white, the ground begins to show itself, dark, compacted, waiting. The forest smells different too. Less sharp, more earthy. Moisture releases scent from bark and soil. Animals respond first. Chickens scratch more aggressively near the door. Goats push against the pen as if sensing space beyond confinement. Larger livestock shift impatiently, eager for open air. You begin moving them gradually back, toward the outer lean-to. During the day, at night, they still return closer for warmth. But their restlessness grows. They know. The cabin interior changes subtly as well. Moisture increases with melting snow. Ventilation must be adjusted more frequently to prevent damp air from settling too heavily. Fire remains necessary, especially after sunset, but its purpose shifts. It is no longer the only barrier against survival-threatening cold and discomfort. You notice how differently you approach the hearth now. Less urgent feeding, more controlled burn. Wood supply is low but manageable. You calculate that it will last until sustained warmth arrives. Sleep shifts again. You lie down beneath layered wool, but the air does not bite at exposed skin as sharply. Blankets feel heavier than needed some nights. You loosen them slightly. The first time you do, it feels strange. Almost risky, but the warmth holds. You wake less often to adjust clothing. Children sprawl slightly more in their sleep rather than curling tightly. Elders shift more freely without wincing at stiffness. Breathing across the cabin sounds deeper. One evening, you wake during the usual interval and hear something unfamiliar. Faint, high-pitched. You hold still and listen. A bird. Not the distant cry of a winter crow. Something lighter. Shorter call. It is brief, but unmistakable. You lie back down with a steady sense of recognition. Winter's grip is loosening. The psychological weight lightens more slowly than the temperature. For weeks, you trained yourself to expect hardship each night, to scan foredrafts, coughs, roof strain. Now, you must retrain yourself to relax. You still inspect seams before sleep, but fewer need repair. Mud has softened slightly in warmer air, allowing for easier patching during daylight. You strengthen weak spots in preparation for spring rains. Different challenge. Same vigilance. During daylight hours, you begin clearing small areas of snow near the cabin. Shovel strokes reveal patches of wet ground. The first time your tools strike soil instead of ice, you pause. It is solid. Cold, but workable soon. You feel energy returning to your movements. Not frantic energy. Purposeful. Plans discussed during winter nights now take shape in daylight. Tools sharpened, seeds checked for dryness. Field boundaries walked again. At night, sleep deepens further. You still wake occasionally. Habit does not disappear overnight. But the waking is brief. You check the fire almost out of routine. It glows steadily. No emergency. No urgent correction. You lie back down and drift quickly into second sleep. Dreams change again. Less about survival, more about action. You see yourself walking through open ground, turning soil, building a more permanent structure beside the cabin. The cabin itself feels different. It is no longer fragile shelter against overwhelming force. It is proof. It held. You wake one morning to a steady sound outside, water running more forcefully. You step out and find narrow streams forming along the slope beyond the clearing. Snow has retreated further overnight. Mud clings to your boots. The ground feels alive. You inhale deeply. The air smells of wet wood and thawing earth. Eat this. Not warm, but it is moving. You return inside and look around the cabin. The walls that once seemed temporary now feel foundational. Blankets that once felt like barriers now feel like simple bedding. Fire, once lifeline, now flickers calmly. The group moves differently too. Shoulders relax. Voices lift slightly. Laughter appears in small bursts during daylight tasks. At night, prayer shifts again. Gratitude deepens, not for survival alone, but for transition. You lie down one evening and realize something quietly important. You are not bracing yourself. Your body does not tighten in anticipation of cold shock. You settle naturally. Sleep comes without negotiation. You wake only once, briefly, and notice that the air inside the cabin is almost comfortable. You do not adjust your blanket. You close your eyes again. Morning arrives brighter, longer. Snow now clings only two shaded edges of the clearing. The forest floor begins to show patches of brown. The season has turned. Not suddenly, not triumphantly, but steadily. There is no celebration, only work ahead. But the hardest nights are behind you. And when you lie down again that evening, you do so knowing that winter no longer owns the dark. The morning does not announce itself loudly. There is no trumpet of birds, no sudden warmth sweeping through the cabin. Instead, you wake and notice something missing. The sharp edge. For months, waking meant immediate awareness of cold air against your face, of breath clouding above you, of the need to check the fire before fully rising. Today, you open your eyes and lie still. The air feels neutral. Not warm, but not biting. You sit up slowly. The fire has burned down to faint embers, but the cabin remains tolerable without immediate tending. You do not rush to feed the hearth. You listen instead. Outside, the sound of water is steady now, not dripping, but flowing. Snowmelt moves beyond the walls in small, persistent channels. You stand and walk to the door. When you open it, the air that meets you is cool but soft. The sky holds a clearer blue than you have seen since autumn. Sunlight touches the clearing fully, reaching places that were shadowed for weeks. Snow remains in patches, but large sections of earth are visible now. Mud glistens where frost once hardened everything solid. You step forward. Your boots sink slightly into thawing ground. It feels unfamiliar. Not resistant, not frozen. Responsive. You'll turn back and look at the cabin. The structure stands weathered, but intact. Mud seems darkened by moisture. Roof, slightly uneven from months of snow weight. Smoke vent open and clean. It does not look like a temporary refuge anymore. It looks earned. Inside, others are rising. Blankets are folded more loosely now. Bedding is carried outside to air in the sunlight, a practice delayed for months by relentless cold. You help spread wool layers across low branches and makeshift lines. Sunlight touches fabric directly. Steam rises faintly as trapped winter dampness evaporates. The smell of wool and smoke mingles with fresh air. It feels like release. Animals are moved fully back into the outer enclosure. They step into open ground eagerly, testing soft earth with cautious hooves. Chickens scatter across exposed patches, scratching energetically. Their restlessness during late winter now finds direction. You move through the morning tasks without urgency. Wood is still gathered, but not in panic. Fire still lit, but not a shield against survival. It is for cooking, for comfort, for continuity. You pass at the edge of the clearing and look toward the forest. Trees remain bare, but something about their stillness feels different. Not threatening, not watchful, simply present. The forest did not change its nature. You changed your understanding of it. The winter that once felt like opposition now feels like passage. You think back to that first night on the frozen shore, the canvas tent snapping in wind, the ground stealing warmth from your bones, the fear of every sound beyond firelight. You remember lying awake, convinced that the night might take more than you could defend. And now you stand here, not untouched, but intact. The transformation is not dramatic. There is no single moment where fear vanished. Instead, winter reshaped you. Gradually, you learn to build tighter walls, to layer clothing with intention, to eat for warmth, to sleep beside others without hesitation, to listen for breath, to bank fire with patience, to accept help, to adapt. The cabin behind you holds those lessons in every seam. You step back inside and notice how different the interior feels in daylight without harsh cold pressing inward. The space seems larger, less confined. Smoke drifts upward more easily. Moisture no longer condenses heavily along walls. You sit briefly near the hearth and rest your hands over fading embers. For months, fire meant survival. Now, it means continuity. You will still need it in cool evenings, but not as shield against death. Children move more freely now, no longer restricted to the center of shared bedding each night. Elders stretch near the doorway, letting sunlight warm stiff joints. Conversations shift entirely toward work ahead, clearing fields, reinforcing structures, planting when soil softens enough to turn. You feel fatigue in your muscles, but it is different from winter fatigue. It is readiness. You walk outside again and kneel near a patch of exposed ground. You press your hand against the soil. It is cold, damp, but not frozen solid. Son. The long nights have ended. Darkness will still come each evening, but it will not feel endless. You think about sleep tonight. You will still lie down in the same place, still arrange blankets, still bank embers lightly, but you will not brace for assault from the air. You will not wake expecting the fire to be nearly gone. You will not measure the night in terms of survival alone. Sleep will return to something closer to rest. The sun climbs higher. warming the cabin walls gently. You gather tools and begin minor repairs. Not emergency patching, but improvement. Strengthening beams, smoothing interior walls, preparing for permanence. Winter forced you into defense. Spring invites you into construction. As afternoon light stretches longer across the clearing, you pause again. You realize something quietly significant. Winter did not break you. It did not drive you away. It shaped your habits. It hardened your patience. It refined your attention. The first winter at the edge of the world is no longer a threat. It is history that night. When you lie down, the cabin feels different. Air moves gently through the vent. The fire burns low and steady without aggressive feeding. You close your eyes without counting the hours until dawn. Without calculating wood supply, without listening for coughs. Breathing around you is calm. Outside, water continues to move softly through thawing ground. You drift into sleep more deeply than at any point during winter. Not from exhaustion, from ease. And when you wake in the early morning, sunlight already touching the wall, you understand fully. The hardest season has passed. The land remains demanding. Work will be relentless in different ways, but the nights ahead will not test you as those did. You rise, step outside into cool but gentle air, and let the morning settle around you. The edge of the world no longer feels like an ending. It feels like beginning. And now, the fire is burned low. The cabin stands quiet beneath a gentler sky. Winter has passed, not in a single moment, but in many small ones, sealed seams, shared warmth, steady breath through the longest nights. If this story helped you slow down, if it carried you somewhere quieter, then you are always welcome here. At Go to Sleep Historian, we do not rush the past. We walk through it slowly. We listen carefully, and we rest inside it. If you'd like more calm journeys into forgotten winters, distant centuries, and the quiet realities of survival, consider subscribing. For now, let your breathing settle, let your thoughts soften, and let the night carry you gently forward. Good night!